Chapter 265. Anger. Yi Xian was naturally furious. He did not expect that the Realm Defense Alliance would not dare to kill him openly, but instead set their sights on his sister, Yi Ling. Whoever dared to set their sights on Yi Ling, Yi Xian would be absolutely irreconcilable with that person. To the divine central continent. Yi Xian did not hesitate at all. However, before going he had to do one or two things first. Ning Kingdom. After Yi Xian arrived in Ning Kingdom, in order not to attract attention, he quietly sneaked into Tuoba Yan's palace. As soon as he entered the palace, Yi Xian was stunned. Inside the palace, Tuoba Yan and Jianji were sitting in a huge wooden tub bathing. In an instant, many images appeared in Yi Xian's mind. At this moment he was in a dilemma. Or not look. Without being in a dilemma for long, Yi Xian shook his head and prepared to leave. Men could be dissolute but they could not be obscene. Moreover, sneaking around like this was a form of disrespect to the two women. Even if he wanted to look, he had to do it openly. How could he sneak around? Yi Xian was not that kind of person. Yi Xian quietly retreated, but the next moment he suddenly revealed his true form, pushed open the door and said loudly, "Long time no see." Hearing Yi Xian's voice, Jianji and Tuoba Yan who were in the tub were stunned. Yi Xian was also dumbfounded at this moment. The three of them were dumbfounded, but Tuoba Yan and Jianji just happened to get up, so their beautiful bodies were unreservedly presented in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was the first to recover and he hurriedly turned around. "I didn't see anything, really?" Tuoba Yan's beautiful eyes were filled with anger. "Get out." Yi Xian hurriedly walked out of the hall, and at this time two female guards appeared in front of him. Obviously they were alerted by Yi Xian. The two female guards were about to make a move, but when they saw that it was Yi Xian, they were stunned for a moment before hurriedly bowing. Obviously he knew Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. "It's a misunderstanding. You can leave now." The two female guards looked at each other. After a moment of hesitation, they quietly retreated. After the two of them left, Yi Xian sat on the ground. His heart was thumping wildly. It was a little exciting. 15 minutes later, in Tuoba Yan's chamber, Tuoba Yan and Jianji sat on the bed while Yi Xian sat on a chair by the side. The two women didn't say anything and just stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian felt his scalp go numb. After a moment, Yi Xian was the first to break the deadlock. He smiled bitterly. "I actually didn't see anything. You know I don't have eyes." Tuoba Yan glared at Yi Xian. "Don't talk nonsense. Tell me, what are you here for?" Yi Xian nodded and said seriously, "I want to go to the Divine Central Continent." "The Divine Central Continent?" Tuoba Yan frowned slightly. "What's wrong?" Yi Xian told them about the Realm Defense Alliance's attempt to force Yi Ling into marriage. Inside the hall, the two women were silent. After a moment, Tuoba Yan said solemnly, "This matter isn't that simple." Yi Xian nodded. "I know. I came this time because I'm a little worried about the two of you." Hearing Yi Xian's words, the two women glanced at him, and the anger in Tuoba Yan's eyes faded slightly. At this moment, Yi Xian took out a spatial ring and handed it to Tuoba Yan. "There are 300 million supreme-grade spirit stones in this spatial ring. 100 million of them are for the two of you to cultivate, and the remaining 200 million are for activating the 12 metal colossi. As long as the Devil Sect and Ghost Sect don't act against the Ning Kingdom, these 12 metal colossi are enough to deal with the cultivators of the Divine Central Continent. As for the Devil Sect and Ghost Sect, I'll personally go there." Tuoba Yan frowned again. "You're going to the Devil Sect?" Yi Xian smiled. "Don't worry, I'm confident." Tuoba Yan hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Will you come back after this?" Yi Xian shook his head. The two women were stunned. At this moment, Yi Xian asked with a smile, "Do you want me to come back?" "Yes," Jianji said suddenly. Tuoba Yan said coldly, "No." Jianji glanced at Tuoba Yan, and then he looked at Yi Xian. "She does." Yi Xian was speechless. Tuoba Yan rolled his eyes at Jianji. Yi Xian smiled. "Don't worry, I'll definitely come back to Pine Prefecture. As for the two of you, you must take good care of yourselves. If you encounter any difficulties, you can contact Jiang Jiao, Advisor Lu, and the others at any time, and they'll come to help immediately." Jianji nodded. "All right." Yi Xian walked over to them and gave them a light hug. "Take care." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Tuoba Yan suddenly said, "Wait." Yi Xian stopped and turned around. Tuoba Yan hesitated for a moment, and then he walked over to Yi Xian and said softly, "I'll wait for your return." His voice was very soft like the buzz of a mosquito. Yi Xian smiled. "And then?" Tuoba Yen glared at Yi Xian. And then die. Yi Xian laughed, and then he walked over to Tuoba Yan's ear and whispered something. Tuoba Yen immediately blushed, and then he threw a white jade bottle at Yi Xian and said angrily, "Get lost." Yi Xian put away the white jade bottle, chuckled and turned to leave. Seeing Yi Xian disappear into the distance, Tuoba Yan's eyes suddenly became a little dazed. At this moment she suddenly felt a little lost in her heart. Well, she did not think too much about it. She only knew that there seemed to be something more in her heart. After Yi Xian left the kingdom of Ning, he went directly to the Devil Sect. The Devil Sect's headquarters was built in an ancient city. The Devil Sect did not blindly kill. On the contrary, the Devil Sect had absorbed many cultivators from the divine central continent. The current Devil Sect was gradually strengthening itself. In a large hall, the Devil Sect master Ku Mingshu was meditating. Suddenly there was a cough in the hall. Ku Mingshu opened his eyes abruptly. Not far away from him, a black-clothed man had appeared out of nowhere. The man's back was facing him and his shadow was very long. Ku Mingshu's expression instantly turned solemn when he saw this person. This was because he did not know how the person appeared, and he did not even notice when the person appeared. Most importantly, he could not sense any aura from the person in front of him. He could not sense any aura at all, as if the person did not exist. What kind of expert was this? Ku Mingshu's forehead was already dripping with cold sweat. At this moment, the man in black suddenly said, "Sect Master Ku, don't be afraid. The old man does not mean you any harm. Otherwise, your head would have been removed." His voice was a little hoarse. Ku Mingshu calmed down and said in a deep voice, "Senior, who are you?" The man in black said, "The old man has left the firmament world for too long. This name means nothing to the firmament world now." He had left the firmament world for too long. Ku Mingshu's heart skipped a beat. "Senior, why are you looking for me?" The man in black nodded. "Of course. Sect Master Ku seems to have forgotten something." "Something?" Ku Mingshu was stunned. "Senior, please enlighten me." The man in black said, "Sect Master Ku once promised my disappointing disciple 1 billion supreme spiritual stones, but Sect Master Ku only paid me 500 million. Ku Mingshu was stunned. In the next moment his expression changed drastically. "Yi Xian. Are you Yi Xian's master?" The man in black nodded. Ku Mingshu gulped. May I ask if you are Senior Firmament World Sword Master?" The man in black went silent for a while, then said softly, "I never thought that after 1,000 years, there would still be someone who remembers the old man. Firmament World Sword Master." Ku Mingshu's mind instantly went blank. He's still alive. Yi Xian did not lie to him. The Firmament World Sword Master was still alive and he had returned. The Firmament World Sword Master. He had once suppressed the Realm Protection Alliance with his own strength for 100 years, causing them to be unable to breathe. Moreover, he was once the publicly known #1 expert in the firmament world. At this moment, Ku Mingshu's heart was in extreme shock. At this moment, the man in black suddenly said, "Sect Master Ku, one must be trustworthy. What do you think?" Ku Mingshu quickly took out a storage ring. With a flick of his finger, the storage ring flew towards the black-clothed man. Then he bowed deeply. "It's my fault. Now, I hope Senior can give these 500 million supreme spiritual stones to young Master Yi." The man in black nodded slightly as he put away the storage ring. "The old man is not here for a mere 500 million supreme spiritual stones." Ku Mingshu quickly said, "Of course. How could Senior care about 500 million supreme spiritual stones? If Senior has any instructions, please let me know." The man in black nodded. "This time, the Realm Defense Alliance has targeted my disappointing disciple again and again. The old man is going to bring him to the Divine Central Continent to seek justice from the Realm Defense Alliance. However, my disappointing disciple is worried about some people in the Azure Province. For example, the Ning country and the Great Cloud Empire." Ku Mingshu quickly said, "Don't worry, Senior. The Devil Sect will take good care of the Ning country and the Great Cloud Empire. We won't let the cultivators of the Divine Central Continent find trouble with them." The man in black nodded. "In that case, I'll have to trouble you." Ku Mingshu smiled bitterly. "Of course not. However, I have a question. Since Senior is still alive, why didn't you show up personally? If that's the case, the Realm Defense Alliance won't dare to find trouble with young Master Yi again." The man in black shook his head. "Young man, if you don't temper yourself, how can you become a talent? The Realm Defense Alliance is a good training ground for you. Moreover, after the old man left the Azure Firmament world, the Realm Defense Alliance has become even more arrogant." Ku Mingshu nodded in agreement. After Senior left, The Realm Defense Alliance began to suppress the forces of the Azure Firmament World in order to become the overlord. This time, the Azure Firmament World has undergone a great change and the spiritual chi has dried up. Not only does the Realm Defense Alliance want to weaken the forces of the Divine Central Continent, but they also want to take the origin heart of the Azure Province. The man in black smiled. Don't worry, the Realm Defense Alliance won't be able to run around for long. Kumingshi was shocked. Senior, are you going to take action against the Realm Defense Alliance? The man in black said, the Realm Defense Alliance's actions have caused dissatisfaction among many people. Not only the forces of the Azure Firmament World are dissatisfied, but also some forces outside the Azure Firmament World. This time the old man came back to bring my useless disciple to train. Secondly, it's naturally for the Realm Defense Alliance. Kumingshu's eyelids twitched. As expected, the Firmament Sword Master was going to take action against the Realm Defense Alliance. The Realm Defense Alliance's doomsday is coming. At this moment, the man in black suddenly said, the old man shouldn't show himself for the time being. I'll have to trouble Sect Master Ku to deal with the matters of the Azure Province. After saying that, he walked out of the hall. Kumingshu hurriedly bowed. Senior, take care. Chapter 266. Kumingshu heaved a sigh of relief after the black-clothed man left. He was still in shock. The Firmament Sword Master. He didn't expect the Firmament Sword Master to still be alive. Not only was he alive, but he had also returned to the Firmament World. Kumingshu was glad that he didn't kill Yi Xian back then. Otherwise, not only would the Realm Protection Alliance be in trouble, but the Devil Sect would also be in trouble. Kumingshu returned to his seat and said softly, I'll have to be more cautious in the future. The black-clothed man left the Devil Sect silently without alerting anyone, just like how he came. In a mountain range, the black-clothed man stopped and took off his black clothes. The black-clothed man was none other than Yi Xian. Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief. He had to admit that his trip to the Devil Sect was very risky. If Kumingshu were to attack him, his cover would be blown. He was betting that Kumingshu wouldn't dare to attack him. And he was right. After he used the Chaos Chi to conceal his aura, Kumingshu couldn't see through him at all. Not only that, but Kumingshu also couldn't sense his presence at all. Under such circumstances, Kumingshu definitely wouldn't dare to attack him. Subconsciously, Kumingshu had already regarded him as a terrifying old monster. Although he had successfully deceived Kumingshu, he was still a little flustered. Under such circumstances, he would definitely be besieged if he made a mistake. Fortunately, he had successfully deceived Kumingshu. In this way, he could leave Qingzhou with a peace of mind because Kumingshu would protect the Ning country and the Great Cloud Empire for him. Without thinking further, Yi Xian turned around and left. His destination this time was the Divine Central Continent. 2 hours later, Yi Xian boarded a cloud ship heading to the Divine Central Continent. In a private room on the cloud ship, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the bed, deep in thought. This time, the Realm Protection Alliance's target wasn't Yi Ling, but him, Yi Xian. If he didn't handle this properly when he arrived at the Central Divine Prefecture, not only would he not be able to help his younger sister, but he might even lose his life. It should be noted that the Divine Central Continent was the territory of the Realm Defense Alliance, and the Realm Defense Alliance was deeply rooted in the Divine Central Continent. Whether it was in terms of strength or influence, it was extremely powerful. If he went against the Realm Protection Alliance, the one who would suffer would definitely be him. One must be tough but not recklessly tough. He had to think of a comprehensive plan. Time passed bit by bit. The cloud ship had already left Wanqiu Mountain and arrived at a vast sea. During this period of time, Yi Xian had been constantly studying the Central Divine Prefecture. In order to understand the Divine Central Continent, he had specially bought a history of the Divine Central Continent from Drunken Immortal Inn. The Firmament World was divided into 3 great continents: the Central Divine Prefecture, the Kanglan Province, and the Azure Province. In truth, these 3 great continents were all connected. However, the distance between the 3 great provinces was rather far. Although there was a certain amount of communication between them, the gap between them was not small. The main reason was still the Divine Central Continent, because its martial arts civilization was the most developed of the 3 great provinces. In the eyes of the native cultivators of the Divine Central Continent, whether it was the Azure Province or the Kanglan Province, they were both barbarian backwater lands. But this was normal, because the strength of the Divine Central Continent far surpassed that of the Azure Province and the Kanglan Province. The Divine Central Continent was divided into the Upper Realm and the Lower Realm, but it didn't mean that the forces in the Upper Realm were necessarily stronger than those in the Lower Realm. Some forces were able to stay in the upper realm because their ancestors were powerful enough to establish their own realm. Simply put, they had to rely on their ancestors. And there were a few powerful forces in the lower realm. Even the Realm Defense Alliance didn't dare offend them lightly. One sect, one sword, one lineage. One sect, the Mystic Sect, was the most mysterious force in the Divine Central Continent, even more mysterious than the Realm Defense Alliance. No one knew the location of the Mystic Sect's headquarters. All they knew was that the number one genius on the Divine Central Continent's senior-level genius ranking was a self-proclaimed member of the Mystic Sect. One sword was the Grey Sword Sect. The Grey Sword Sect had been at its most glorious when the Sword Master of the Grey Realm was still around. At that time, the Grey Sword Sect had undoubtedly been the strongest force in the Green Firmament world, and even the Realm Defense Alliance had been suppressed. Although the Sword Master of the Grey Realm was no longer around, no force dared to underestimate them. One lineage referred to the 10,000 Beasts mountain range. In the Green Firmament world, there was a group of powerful monsters that lived in the 10,000 Beasts mountain range. The true strength of the 10,000 Beasts mountain range had always been a mystery. Even the Realm Defense Alliance was afraid of the 10,000 Beast mountain range. All in all, the Realm Defense Alliance wasn't absolutely the strongest force in the Divine Central Continent. In his room, Yi Xian put away the information. After a long period of contemplation, he began to cultivate. He was now at the Dharma realm, and what he needed to do was reach the Dharma realm before he entered the Divine Central Continent. In order to reach the Dharma realm, he had to learn how to use space. With the Space Tao Law, it wasn't difficult for him to accomplish that. In the following period of time, Yi Xian used the Space Tao Law to comprehend it. Although he could use the Space Tao Law to use space and even spatial decomposition, that was the ability of the Space Tao Law, not his own. What he needed to do was to be able to use space without borrowing the Space Tao Law. Finally, he would use space disintegration. It could be said that the Space Tao Law was his best master, at least until he reached the Dharma realm. 2 days later, the cloud ship arrived at an archipelago. At this moment, a voice came from the ship. Everyone, the Thousand Clouds Island is up ahead. Mercenaries and pirates come and go there all year round, so please be careful. At this moment, Yi Xian walked out of the cloud ship. He would come out to bask in the sun at noon every day. At that moment, he did not reveal his true appearance. Instead, he was wearing a large gray robe that covered his entire body. It was no secret in the Azure Firmament world that the Realm Defense Alliance had placed a bounty on his head. Although he wasn't afraid of trouble, he didn't want to cause any trouble right now. It was better to keep a low profile. At this moment, a man and a woman arrived at Yi Xian's side. The man wore a white robe and held a white jade fan in his hand. He had a graceful bearing, while the woman wore a jade green dress. Her features were delicate and pretty, and she was quiet and elegant. The man sized up Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Brother, you should have escaped from Azure Province as well, right?" "Escape?" Yi Xian turned to look at the man, slightly puzzled. The man shook his head slightly. Azure Province has almost completely fallen into enemy hands. Many powerful clans and individuals are thinking of ways to escape Azure Province and head for the Divine Central Continent. After all, only the Divine Central Continent can be considered peaceful in the Azure Firmament world. Yi Xian nodded slightly, somewhat understanding. Although the rich and powerful clans couldn't resist in times of chaos, they had the ability to escape. Take the two people before him for example. They were probably either rich or noble. At any given time, it was actually the people at the bottom who were truly miserable. Meanwhile, the man suddenly said, "Actually, the main reason our Azure Province has fallen into such a state is because of that Yi Xian." Yi Xian was speechless. The man tapped his fan against his palm, and his eyes were filled with rage. I don't know how that Yi Xian offended the Realm Defense Alliance to the point that they actually issued an arrest warrant for him. It's exactly because of this arrest warrant that the Devil Sect, Ghost Sect, and countless cultivators from the Divine Central Continent were drawn here. Cultivators. Even if Yi Xian dies 10,000 times, it still won't be enough to atone for his crimes. Yi Xian was about to speak when the woman suddenly said, "Big brother, you can't blame Yi Xian for this. In my opinion, it's the Realm Defense Alliance's fault. Firstly, it's exactly because of their connivance that those cultivators from the Divine Central Continent dared to come to Azure Province. If they hadn't given the nod, would those cultivators have dared to act rashly in Azure Province? Secondly, even if Yi Xian offended the Realm Defense Alliance, why didn't they just go look for Yi Xian? In my opinion, Yi Xian is just an excuse the Realm Defense Alliance is looking for. It's an excuse for those cultivators from the Divine Central Continent to come to Azure Province. Yi Xian couldn't help but look at the woman, and he was slightly surprised. Meanwhile, the man grunted, "What do you know? It's exactly because of Yi Xian that the Realm Defense Alliance vented its anger on the entire Azure Province. If it wasn't for him, then it would be impossible for so many things to happen in Azure Province. Yi Xian is a jinx, he." Suddenly Yi Xian turned around and slapped the man. Slap. A resounding slap resounded, and then the man was blasted over 10 m away. Everyone on the deck of the cloud vessel was stunned. The woman by Yi Xian's side gazed at Yi Xian with astonishment. Why did you hit him?" Yi Xian said indifferently, "It's rare to encounter such a weirdo, so I wanted to hit him." The woman? Nearby, the man who had been blasted away by Yi Xian stood up, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and then glared angrily at Yi Xian. You actually dared to hit me? Do you know that the steward of this cloud vessel is my uncle?" Yi Xian suddenly vanished, and in the next moment, slap. The man was blasted away again. Yi Xian clapped his hands, all the more reason to hit him. The man stood up again, and this time, besides rage, there was also fear in his eyes. Because he hadn't even been able to fight back just now. He was at the peak of the divine combination realm. The man didn't try to put on a brave front again. It didn't take long for an old man and 6 guards to appear on the cloud vessel's deck. All 6 of them had a small Zue character on their left chests. Immortal Indulgence in. Although the drunken Immortal In had announced that they would withdraw from Qingzhou, they actually didn't. They were still running some businesses such as this cloud vessel business. When the old man saw the man's appearance, his face instantly turned cold, then he turned to look at Yi Xian. "You did this?" Yi Xian nodded. The old man stared at Yi Xian. Previously he said that he was the old man's nephew, but you still wanted to attack him. "It seems that you don't put my drunken Immortal In your eyes." Yi Xian shook his head. "I have no ill intentions towards the drunken Immortal In." The old man said coldly, "Old man, I can see that you have a lot of ill intentions. Since you dare to attack me on the cloud vessel, I believe that you have some confidence. Tell me." Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm just a rogue cultivator." The old man narrowed his eyes. "I'll give you one last chance. If you don't tell me your background, this old man won't be polite." Yi Xian thought for a moment, then flicked his finger, and a dark golden token appeared in front of the old man. This token was given to him by the 5th floor master, and it was the highest grade of the drunken Immortal In. The old man glanced at the token and frowned. "What rubbish is this?" Saying that, he casually threw the cloud vessel down, then said, "Beat him to death, throw the cloud vessel away." Yi Xian. P.S. Let me explain why there are 2 updates today. I've been thinking for an entire night, and I finally thought of a reason that won't be scolded. Because today that something came. Chapter 267. Yi Xian was stunned. He doesn't know him? He actually doesn't know him? That's the highest gold card of the Immortal Indulgence In. And it's been thrown away just like that. As soon as the old man finished speaking, the guards of the Immortal Indulgence In were about to attack. Meanwhile, the woman spoke abruptly. "Wait." She stood in front of Yi Xian as she spoke. At the same time, she waved her hand, and the black venerable card that the old man had thrown off the cloud ship flew back onto the cloud ship. Then it landed in her hand. Everyone gazed at the woman. The woman glanced at the black card, and her hand started to tremble as she looked at it. The old man frowned. "Little girl, what are you doing?" The woman gazed at Yi Xian, and her voice was trembling slightly. Is this a black card?" Yi Xian spoke indifferently. "Take a guess." The woman took a deep breath, and then she gazed at the old man. The old man hurriedly walked over and snatched the black card. As he looked at it, his hand started to tremble as well. A black card. Naturally, he didn't know about it because he'd only heard of it. It was the highest black card of the Immortal Indulgence In, and one didn't just have to be rich to possess such a card, one had to be of status as well. How could a lowly manager like him have come into contact with such a person? Or perhaps he'd never imagined that there would be a passenger with a black card on the ship. Moreover, Yi Xian was in an ordinary room. The old man's body trembled as he gazed at Yi Xian. "Say, Your Excellency." "Old man." "Old man is as blind as a bat." Yi Xian waved his hand, and then he pointed at the woman. "From this moment onwards, she'll be the manager of the ship." The woman was stunned, and then she hurriedly shook her head. No. I can't." Yi Xian spoke indifferently. "I think you can." The old man wanted to say something, but Yi Xian waved his hand. "Leave." The old man naturally didn't dare to resist, and he immediately bowed deeply before he hurriedly pulled the man away with him. The woman hesitated for a moment before she said, "Sir, the steward of the ship." Yi Xian said, "Your uncle and brother are short-sighted and overly arrogant. If they were ordinary people it would be fine. But if they were in power, there would be a great disaster in the future." The woman thought for a long time before she finally nodded. "I understand." Yi Xian nodded. "You may leave." The woman hesitated for a moment before she said, "I'm Mo Lien. You can call me Little Lien. Please feel free to let me know if you need anything." After saying that, she bowed slightly, turned around and left. On the deck of the cloud ship, Yi Xian placed his hands behind his back and calmed himself down. There was only one day left before the Realm Defense Alliance would forcefully marry Yi Ling. He had to arrive at the Central Divine Prefecture by tonight. And with his current speed, if nothing unexpected happened, there should be no problem. Yi Xian slowly clenched his fists. At this moment he was naturally burning with anxiety. Yi Ling. He didn't know if the Frost North sect would protect Yi Ling to the death. If they didn't protect Yi Ling and handed Yi Ling over. In short, he had to get to the Central Divine Prefecture as soon as possible. He wouldn't place his hopes on anyone else when it came to his younger sister. Right when the cloud ship was about to fly past the Thousand Cloud Islands, an enormous net was suddenly cast down from above, and it instantly enveloped the entire ship. At the same time, 4 other black cloud ships suddenly appeared around the ship. "It's the mercenaries and pirates." A shocked voice suddenly resounded from the ship. After that, the old steward that Yi Xian had dismissed hurried over to the front of the ship, and his eyes were filled with astonishment. A man in luxurious robes suddenly appeared above Yi Xian and the others. He looked down and was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Fuck off." Clouds. On the ship, the old man, Xiao Lian, and the others all looked at Yi Xian, their eyes filled with astonishment. In the air, the man in luxurious robes looked at Yi Xian with a ferocious expression. "You told me to fuck off?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I've changed my mind." As he spoke, he raised a hand and pointed. Swish. A ray of sword light instantly pierced the man's forehead. In the air, the man in luxurious robes slowly fell. Everyone was dumbfounded. Yi Xian drew a line with his fingers, and a ray of sword light rippled out. The net that enveloped the cloud ship instantly shattered. Then he turned to Xiao Lian. "Keep going, don't stop." Xiao Lian was stunned, and then she hurriedly turned around and shouted, "Don't stop, keep going." The cloud ship continued forward. In the distance, 6 cloud ships suddenly blocked the path of the cloud ship that Yi Xian was on. A dozen experts suddenly flew out from the 6 cloud ships. They were all in the Dharma realm. At the sight of this, everyone on the cloud ship that Yi Xian was on instantly turned pale. This was because there were only 2 Dharma realm experts on this cloud ship. The old man hesitated for a moment, and then he hurriedly bowed deeply to the sky. "Everyone, this old man is the manager of the Drunken Immortal Inn. Please consider my Drunken Immortal Inn." At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly flew out. The next moment, a scream sounded in the distance, and a bloody head slowly fell from the sky. After a few breaths, Yi Xian had returned to the cloud ship, and in the distance, a dozen heads fell from the sky in an orderly manner. On the cloud ship, everyone was petrified. Yi Xian sheathed his sword. "Forward, speed up." The cloud ship continued forward. A moment later, only Yi Xian was left on the cloud ship. Obviously, the people on the cloud ship were more afraid of Yi Xian than they were grateful. The killing intent that Yi Xian emitted just now was too terrifying. At this moment, Xiao Lian suddenly came behind Yi Xian. She glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, "Your identity should have been exposed." Obviously, she had already guessed Yi Xian's identity. Not only her, many people might have guessed it just now. Swordsman. There was only one famous swordsman in Qingzhou, and that was Yi Xian. Moreover, who in Qingzhou didn't know that Yi Xian was on good terms with the Drunken Immortal Inn? It was completely possible that Yi Xian had the black card of the Drunken Immortal Inn. Exposed identity? Yi Xian said softly, "It's fine." Xiao Lian nodded and did not say anything else. She turned around and retreated. On the deck of the cloud ship, only Yi Xian was left. Yi Xian took out a small wooden figure. The small wooden figure had 2 whips tied to it, and it looked exactly like Yi Ling. Yi Xian said softly, "Don't worry, with me around no one will dare to bully you." The cloud ship moved forward at top speed. 6 hours later, the cloud ship suddenly stopped. They had arrived. When the cloud ship stopped, Xiao Lian came to the deck of the cloud ship. At this moment, the deck was already empty. Xiao Lian was stunned for a moment before she said softly, "Gone?" Just at this moment, an elderly suddenly appeared in the sky above the cloud ship. The elderly soul trace swept across the cloud ship, but he didn't discover anything. Finally, the elderly's gaze fell onto Xiao Lian. "Where's that swordsman?" Xiao Lian's voice trembled. "Gone, already gone." The elderly turned his head and swept a glance at the surroundings. He shouldn't have gone far. Check the surroundings thoroughly. Saying that, he had already disappeared. Below, in a corner, Yi Xian said softly, "No wonder the Realm Protection Alliance is so well informed." Saying that, he turned around and left. The current him, as long as he didn't show himself, no one would be able to discover him. Sky Cloud City. Sky Cloud City was the central continent's largest city. This was the largest city in the prefecture, and the master behind this city was the Realm Defense Alliance. This city was so big that it could accommodate up to 100 million people. And the Realm Protection Alliance could rely on the city to earn at least 10 billion high-grade spirit stones every year. Sky Cloud City wasn't on the ground but in the sky. It was about 800 feet above the ground and was built by the Realm Protection Alliance after spending a huge amount of money. Being in the city, it was like being in the clouds. Yi Xian spent 10 high-grade spirit stones to enter Sky Cloud City. This was the so-called entrance fee. Sky Cloud City could probably earn tens of millions of high-grade spirit stones from this entrance fee daily. At this moment, Yi Xian then realized that he was actually very poor. On this day, the city was decorated with lanterns and streamers, looking very festive. Because today was the day that Sky Cloud City's young city lord Lu Xianming was going to marry the Northern Chill Sect's saintess Yi Ling. On this day, there were many powerhouses who came to Sky Cloud City in advance to congratulate. Among them, even the 3 sects and 5 families had sent people over. Lu Xianming obviously didn't have such a big influence, but his uncle did. Who didn't know that his uncle was the Realm Protection Alliance's Supreme Lu? In the city lord's residence, in one of the main halls, the sound of a lady's laughter could be heard from time to time, and occasionally there were some moaning sounds. And it wasn't just one. At the entrance of the hall, the 2 guards felt unbearably hot listening to it. At this moment, the guard on the left suddenly said, "Today is the young city lord's big day, but he still wants to mess around. If this gets out, I'm afraid that Northern Chill Sect will be angered to death." The guard on the right laughed. "Angered to death? Don't tell me that Northern Chill Sect doesn't know what kind of character young city lord has? They have no other choice. Who asked our young city lord to have Supreme Lu behind him?" Speaking of this, he shook his head and laughed. "When that saintess marries over, I'm afraid she'll have to suffer in the future." The guard on the left nodded slightly. "Don't say any more. The more you talk, the more you slip up. Be careful not to get into trouble." Very quickly, the outside of the hall quietened down. Not only the outside of the hall, even the inside of the hall quietened down. The 2 guards looked at each other and one of them transmitted his profound chi. "I'm afraid this young city lord is playing some tricks again, hee." In the hall. At this moment, a completely naked man was sweating profusely and his eyes were filled with terror. Because there was a sword at his throat. And in front of him stood a man in a gray robe. This man in a gray robe was Yi Xian. Around the 2 of them were 4 to 5 women lying on the ground. But at this moment, these 4 to 5 women had already fainted. The naked man was just about to speak when the sword suddenly moved forward. Swish. The naked man's throat split open and his voice was forcefully swallowed back. Yi Xian punched the man's head and he instantly fainted. Yi Xian kept the storage ring on the man's hand and he took out a white jade bottle. This was what he had gotten from Tuoba Yen. Yi Xian poured out a red elixir and fed it to the man. Then he quietly took the man out of the hall. After dawn, a group of pig demons suddenly appeared at the gate of Sky Cloud City. And among this group of pig demons, there was a naked man with his head covered. And at this moment, this man was doing indescribably shameful things with these pig demons. Countless people were attracted by this scene and soon, more and more people gathered here. More and more people came and in the end, even the city walls were filled with people pointing and talking. And at this moment, the black cloth on the head of the man in the group of pig demons suddenly split open. At this moment, everyone saw the man's true face. When they saw the man's face, there was an uproar. "It's young city lord Lu Xianming? F***ck. Lu Xianming dared to F***ck a pig." Chapter 268. Everyone had an interesting look on their faces. It was rare to see a good show like this. At that moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared at the city gate. It was the city lord of Sky Cloud City, Lu Feng. When he saw Lu Xianming still hugging a pig demon in the distance, Lu Feng's expression turned ugly. With a wave of his right hand, the group of pig demons instantly exploded. At that moment, Lu Xianming charged at the people around him like a madman. Seeing this, everyone's expression changed and they quickly retreated. Lu Feng suddenly shouted, "How dare you!" As soon as he finished speaking, he appeared in front of Lu Xianming and pressed his right hand on the top of Lu Xuanming's head. Lu Xuanming's body trembled violently, and after a while his scarlet eyes gradually became clear. Lu Xianming looked around blankly, then looked at the pig demon corpses on the ground. In the next moment he suddenly raised his head and roared, "Who is it? Who is it?" Lu Feng's expression was gloomy. He turned to look at two guards not far away. The two guards' expressions changed drastically, and they hurriedly knelt on one knee. One of the guards said, "City Lord, the young City Lord forbade the two of us from entering the palace, so what's the use of having the two of you?" Lu Feng suddenly roared. In the next moment he waved his right hand, and the bodies of the two guards exploded. Lu Feng coldly glanced at his surroundings. The faces of the people around him changed drastically, and they hurriedly turned around and fled. In front of the city gate, Lu Feng clenched his fists, his expression frighteningly gloomy. As for Lu Xianming, his facial features were twisted to the point of being deformed. Humiliation. The greatest humiliation of his life. He, Lu Xianming, would soon become the laughingstock of the entire divine central continent. Not only that, but when he thought about what had happened, Lu Xianming was like a raging beast, clenching his fists and roaring madly. Lu Feng turned to look to the side. There an old man quietly appeared. The old man bowed slightly. This should be Yi Xian's doing. Who is Yi Xian? Lu Xianming turned to look at the old man with a ferocious expression. The old man said in a low voice, "The enemy of our realm defense alliance is also Yi Ling's sister. This time he should be after Yi Ling." Yi Ling. Lu Xuanming's expression was ferocious. After a while, he suddenly looked at Lu Feng and said, "Isn't today the day I'm marrying Yi Ling? Let's go and fetch the bride. The humiliation I suffered today, I will return it to his sister 100-fold." Lu Feng nodded. "Of course this grudge will be avenged." Then he turned to the side and said, "Send my order. Go to the frigid North clan to fetch the bride." The old man hesitated for a moment before he said, "That fellow Yi Xian will probably show himself again. Old man, follow him yourself." With that he turned around and left. Very quickly, a huge cloud ship slowly rose up from Sky Cloud City. The cloud ship was decorated with lanterns and banners, looking extremely festive. The destination of this ship was the frigid North clan. What was worth mentioning was that Lu Xian's Sun Hell Pig's matter had swiftly spread throughout the entire Sky Cloud City, and moreover, it was spreading out of Sky Cloud City at an extremely fast speed. Lu Xianming wasn't very famous in the entire divine central continent, but his uncle was. Hence, as the news spread, it would eventually bring Supreme Lord Lu along. But when it spread to some further places, it became Supreme Lord Lu's Sun Hell Pig Realm Defense Alliance. In the hall, Supreme Lord Lu's expression was extremely gloomy. Obviously he already knew about what had happened in Sky Cloud City. After a while, Supreme Lord Lu looked at an old man below him. Still no news of Yi Xian's whereabouts? The old man shook his head. After this person entered the divine central continent, it was as if he had vanished into thin air. There's no news of him at all. According to my deduction, this person might have some sort of aura-concealing treasure on him. Otherwise, it's impossible that there's no trace of him at all. Moreover, this person had entered the governor's residence of Sky Cloud City, but the three true Imperial Realm experts in the residence didn't notice anything at all. Aura concealing. Supreme Lord Lu frowned slightly. Even true Imperial Realm experts were able to conceal him. The old man nodded. This person should have reached the 10,000 Dharma realm. Ordinary Imperial Realm experts are no match for him, and it's difficult for true Imperial Realm experts to discover him. This matter is a little troublesome. Supreme Lord Lu said calmly, "What's troublesome? Why did Yi Xian come to the divine central continent?" "Because of his sister Yi Ling. As long as Yi Ling is still in Frost North Sect, Yi Xian won't be able to run away. Hasn't Xianming gone to Frost North Sect? Bring some men with you. That Yi Xian will definitely appear." The old man hesitated for a moment before saying, "Supreme Lord, if that Sword Immortal appears..." "Sword Immortal." Supreme Lord Lu narrowed his eyes and kept silent for a long time. Finally he said in a deep voice, "Our men should have reached the Endless Star regions by now. We should have information on that mysterious woman soon. As for this Yi Xian, if he appears, feel free to attack. If that mysterious woman appears, As he said that, he flicked his finger and a ray of white light appeared in front of the old man. "What's this?" The old man was slightly puzzled. Supreme Lord Lu said in a deep voice, "This is a clone of my lord. My lord personally bestowed it to me to deal with that mysterious woman. Remember, don't use this clone until the mysterious woman appears. Otherwise, the Realm Defense Alliance won't be able to restrain her." The old man carefully put away the ray of white light. He seemed to have thought of something and said, "Supreme Lord, Yi Xian isn't simple at all. Why don't you kill him yourself and not give him a chance?" Supreme Lord Lu glanced at the old man and said, "I still have important matters to attend to. If you're not confident, then bring 2 more true Imperial Dharma Realm experts with you. I don't believe that Yi Xian is so monstrous that he can even kill true Imperial Dharma Realm experts." The old man he turned around and left without saying another word. Supreme Lord Lu slowly closed his eyes in the hall. The mysterious woman appeared in his mind again. He actually wanted to go there himself, but he was still slightly fearful. One must know that the mysterious woman had killed a few true Imperial Dharma Realm experts in an instant. Even he couldn't kill a true Imperial Dharma Realm expert in an instant. Most importantly, the mysterious woman had broken the formation that his lord had set up in the firmament world with a single sword strike. Although his lord had given him a clone, he still wasn't confident. The terror of the mysterious woman had been deeply imprinted in his mind. This time, if he went there personally and the mysterious woman appeared again, his clone would be useless. Without a doubt, he would really die. Simply put, this time he wanted to see if the mysterious woman would appear again when Yi Xian was in a desperate situation. If she didn't appear, then it would be great. A few true Imperial Dharma Realm experts were enough to kill Yi Xian. If she appeared, then he could protect himself. A moment later, Supreme Lord Lu stood up and came to the back of the hall. There was a pitch-black door at the back of the hall. Behind the door was a deep starry sky. Supreme Lord Lu bowed slightly. "My lord." After a moment of silence, a hoarse voice came from the door. "Track down that woman with all your strength. How dare she ruin my plans? I will destroy her body, imprison her soul, and let her suffer for 100 lifetimes." As soon as the voice fell, in a starry sky palace somewhere in the endless starry sky, a woman in a plain dress suddenly opened her eyes. She looked up and her expression gradually turned cold. "Incantation of truth. What kind of rubbish is this? How dare you cast an incantation of truth on me? Isn't it good to be alive?" As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her hand and an illusory sword quietly condensed in her palm. The woman in the plain dress got up and walked out of the hall. The sword in her hand trembled violently. At the same time she opened her mouth and said, "In the name of my sword, I summon the spirits of the universe." "Who said this? Show yourself." As soon as she finished speaking, the sword in her hand suddenly flew out and entered the starry sky. Soon the starry sky began to tremble. "How dare you!" At this moment, an angry roar suddenly sounded in the starry sky. "Who dares to disturb the order of the starry sky? Are you tired of living?" At the entrance of the palace, the woman in the plain dress raised her head and looked into the starry sky. There was a hint of mockery at the corner of her mouth. "Tired of living? If I don't want to die, who in this world can stop me? If I want someone to die, who can't? P.S. I've been sick with the flu recently. I've been dizzy for a day and I'm feeling weak all over. The flu has been terrifying recently. Everyone should really pay attention to keeping warm. Not only yourself but also your family. Also, everyone should come out and take a look. Let me see you guys who are diving." Chapter 269. Arrogant. In the depths of the distant starry sky, an angry roar suddenly sounded. Then, a powerful pressure passed through the layers of space and crushed towards the woman in the plain dress. The power of the starry sky. At the entrance of the palace, the woman in the plain dress still had a hint of mockery. When the pressure arrived above her head, she pointed with her right hand. A ray of sword light shot into the sky. Boom. In the sky, the pressure instantly disappeared without a trace. After a moment of silence, an incredulous voice sounded from the distant starry sky. Who are you?" the woman in the plain dress sneered. "Do you think you can know my name?" As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her hand and waved. An illusory sword shot into the sky and entered the vast starry sky. The sword passed through the starry sky and the sword light was even more dazzling than the starlight. Not long after, in the distant starry sky, a scream suddenly sounded. Then the starry sky fell into dead silence. At the entrance of the palace, The woman in the plain dress had her hands behind her back and her face was gloomy. Looking at the vast starry sky, her eyes gradually became a little dazed. But soon they became cold again. At this moment she was about to lose her patience. This was because the last time she received news about the other avatar, that avatar had already disappeared. She knew very well that if she did not have a choice, she would definitely not allow herself to disappear after finding him. Simply put, she must have encountered some trouble. And this trouble might not be small. Gradually, a scene from the past appeared in the woman's mind. In the mountain crevice, a little boy was hugging a little girl tightly. The little boy looked out of the mountain crevice in horror. Outside the mountain crevice, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Countless great demons roared wantonly. The entire world looked like it was doomsday. Although the little boy was extremely shocked, he kept comforting the little girl. Don't be afraid. Big brother is here, Big Brother will protect you. The little girl hugged the little boy tightly. Although she was a little afraid, she felt very safe in her big brother's arms. In the middle of the night. Big brother, I'm hungry. The little boy quickly took out a steamed bun and grinned. Eat. Big brother eat too. Big brother has eaten. I'm not hungry really. Touch my belly. As he spoke, the little boy deliberately stuck out his little belly. The little girl believed him. In the middle of the night, the little boy hugged the little girl tightly. His face was extremely pale. He hugged the little girl tightly and said weakly, Ching. Big brother remembers you seem to like to practice swordsmanship. In a daze, the little girl nodded. Chinger has to protect Big Brother, Daddy and Mommy? The little boy suddenly cried. However, the little girl in the black clothes did not see it. After the little girl fell asleep, the little boy gently kissed the little girl's forehead. If you become strong in the future you must protect those who are as weak as us. Mother and father. If there was someone to protect them they wouldn't have died. Also that whatever God. They're so bad beat them to death. Brother, I'm so hungry. As he spoke, the little boy seemed to have thought of something, and his tears flowed like a broken dam. Brother, I'm not afraid of death, but I'm afraid of what will happen to Chinger after I die. You're still so young, Daybreak. The little boy hugged the little girl motionlessly, his body already cold. The little girl buried the little boy in the mountain crevice and knelt there for the entire night. The next day the little girl got up and left. In her hand there was still half a steamed bun. Her brother could eat it, but he had left his last bit of hope for her. In the starry sky, in front of the palace entrance, the woman in the plain dress stood for a long time. 2 streaks of tears had appeared on her cold cheeks. After a long time, the woman in the plain dress said softly, If anything happens to you, I'll destroy all living beings and let them be buried with you. Don't worry, I'll be with you. Without you, what's the point of reaching the peak of swordsmanship? After saying that, the woman walked into the palace. At the same time, her emotionless voice suddenly rang through the entire palace. I have run out of patience. In the palace, countless experts trembled. Azure World, Divine Central Continent. Sky Cloud City's wedding procession entered the Frosty North territory. At that moment, everyone in the Frosty North sect was furious. Who in the Divine Central Continent didn't know Lu Xuanming's character? Moreover, Lu Xuanming had just done something so shocking and shameful. Now, Sky Cloud City was here to escort a bride, and it was the Holy Maiden of the Frosty North sect. This was a slap in the face. A vicious slap in the face of the Frosty North sect. In the Frosty North Hall, everyone from the Frosty North sect had gathered. Yiling was also there. She sat beside Shen Weiyang, dressed in an ice dress and looked very beautiful. Even though Yiling was still young, anyone could tell that she would definitely become a devastatingly beautiful woman in the future. Shen Weiyang looked around. The Realm Defense Alliance and Sky Cloud City are obviously using their power to suppress us. What do you think? Below, a woman said in a low voice, Sect Master, is there really no room for negotiation? Shen Weiyang shook her head. I don't think so. The woman below fell silent. Let's shed all pretense of cordiality. At this moment, a beautiful woman suddenly said, Although our Frosty North sect is not as good as the Realm Defense Alliance, we will not be bullied so easily. If we don't resist to the end, our Frosty North sect will become the laughing stock of the entire Divine Central Continent. Below, some echoed in agreement. The Realm Defense Alliance and Sky Cloud City's forceful marriage was undoubtedly a great humiliation to the Frosty North sect. At this moment, someone suddenly said, If we fall out with them, it is equivalent to declaring war on the Realm Defense Alliance. And if we declare war, our Frosty North sect has no chance of winning. Someone sneered, without any chance of winning, are we going to let the Realm Defense Alliance bully us like this? However, this matter is of great importance and we need to be cautious. Otherwise, once the flames of war start, it will be a disaster for our Frosty North sect. Everyone in the hall was silent, because the Frosty North sect could not defeat the Realm Defense Alliance. Just at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. Why don't we feign civility first? Everyone turned to look. The one who spoke was a beautiful woman. She was the great elder of the Frosty North sect, Lu Yun. Yiling took a look at Lu Yun, her eyes cold. She didn't like this great elder. Because originally, the sacred lady of the Frosty North sect was not her, but the great elder's granddaughter. But after she came, the sacred lady of the Frosty North sect became her. Hence, the great elder would occasionally cause trouble for her. Lu Yun said indifferently, everyone, the spiritual energy in the divine central continent is getting thinner by the day, especially in our Frosty North territory. Many places in our Frosty North territory have already started to melt. Under such circumstances, if our Frosty North sect were to start a war with the Realm Defense Alliance, forgive me for being blunt, what awaits us is the destruction of the sect. The destruction of the sect. Everyone's expressions were grave. No one wanted the sect to be destroyed. At this moment, someone suddenly said, are we really going to marry the sacred lady to that scum? Lu Yun said indifferently, sacred lady? That's the sacred lady of the Frosty North sect. Since you're the sacred lady of our Frosty North sect, then you should naturally think for our sect. Otherwise, what's the point of having a sacred lady who takes up so many cultivation resources by herself but doesn't do anything for our Frosty North sect at a critical moment? Yiling glanced at Lu Yun, Grand Elder I Yiling, am the sacred lady of the Frosty North sect. If my Frosty North sect were to hand me over now, then it wouldn't just be me Yiling but the Frosty North sect and our ancestors. When she spoke up to this point, she stood up and bowed slightly to Lu Yun. I know that my arrival caused the Grand Elder's granddaughter to lose her position as the sacred lady. I'm very sorry for that. However, I still hope that the Grand Elder can set aside his personal feelings for now and work together to face this together. Because without the Frosty North sect, the Grand Elder isn't the Grand Elder anymore, and I'm no longer the sacred lady. What do you think? As soon as she finished speaking, everyone here nodded. Especially Shen Weiyang, she didn't conceal the admiration in her eyes at all. Under the Frosty North sect's full support, Yiling had grown greatly in all aspects. On the other hand, Lu Yun's expression was a bit ugly. Although Yiling's words were gentle, they were as sharp as a knife, and they immediately gained everyone's approval. If she said anything more, then she would be the one who didn't see the bigger picture. Without saying anything else, Lu Yun retreated to the side, but she was still a bit unwilling to give up. She immediately said, let me remind you, this time the Realm Defense Alliance targeted the Frosty North sect and the Sacred Lady because of that Yi Xian. If we don't hand over Yi Xian, the Frosty North sect. How dare you? At this moment Yiling suddenly flew into a rage. A powerful aura suddenly swept out from her body and headed straight for Lu Yun. Everyone was stunned. Obviously they didn't expect Yiling to suddenly attack. In the distance, Lu Yun waved her right hand and directly dispelled the pressure from Yiling. She looked coldly at Yiling. How impudent. Is this the sacred lady of the Frosty North sect? Yiling stared at Lu Yun. If you dare to do anything to my brother, I will definitely kill you. How dare you? Lu Yun said angrily, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you're the sacred lady. Let me tell you, the sacred lady was given to you by the Frosty North sect, not your brother. You, enough. On the side, Shen Weiyang suddenly spoke. Lu Yun didn't say anything, but her expression was extremely cold. Shen Weiyang next to her looked at Yiling, apologized to the great elder. Yiling directly shook her head, no. Shen Weiyang frowned, Shaoling, you're not young anymore. You really shouldn't be so stubborn. Apologize to the great elder. Yiling said coldly, no. Who told her to say that about my brother? Shen Weiyang looked a bit unhappy. Is your brother more important than the Frosty North sect in your heart? Yiling answered without thinking, my brother is more important than my life. Hearing this there was an uproar. But Shen Weiyang flew into a rage, how dare you? You're a traitor. As soon as she finished speaking, a powerful pressure enveloped Yiling. Yiling couldn't take it anymore. Her legs buckled and she knelt down. Yiling felt wronged and started crying, brother? In her most helpless and difficult times, the first person she would think of was her brother. Just then, a man suddenly appeared at the entrance of the Frosty North sect's main hall. Everyone in the field turned their heads in succession. It was Yi Xian. Yi Xian walked slowly to Yi Ling and said with a trembling voice, "Don't cry. I'll take you home." Chapter 270. Arctic. That was how Yi Xian felt at the moment. Yi Ling had always been by his side since they were young. Even though the two of them had led a tough life, he had always tried his best not to let Yi Ling suffer. Even though the two of them had led a tough life, there was joy amidst the hardship. Yi Xian felt as if his heart was being stabbed when he saw Yi Ling crying. No matter how special her physique was or how monstrous her talent was, she would always be a child in his heart. Everyone was stunned when they saw Yi Xian. Obviously they hadn't expected Yi Xian to show up here. Shen Weiyang and the others looked at each other. In the end, Shen Weiyang looked at Yi Xian. "How did you get in here?" At this moment, Shen Weiyang and the others were slightly shocked. Because the Frosty North territory was guarded by all sorts of powerful cultivators. Besides the powerful cultivators, there were also some powerful formations. Unless one was a true Imperial Dharma Realm cultivator, ordinary people wouldn't be able to enter the main hall of the Frosty North sect without making a sound. But Yi Xian was obviously not a true Imperial Dharma Realm cultivator. Yi Xian paid no attention to Shen Weiyang. He walked up to Yi Ling and slashed with his sword. Boom. The pressure that was pressing down on Yi Ling was instantly shattered by Yi Xian's sword. Shen Weiyang and the others instantly became solemn when they saw this. After all, Shen Weiyang was a true Imperial Dharma Realm cultivator. Even though she hadn't used her full strength, it was still the pressure released by a true Imperial Dharma Realm cultivator. But Yi Xian had destroyed it with a single strike. Everyone looked at each other with a wisp of shock in their eyes. Yi Xian paid no attention to the people of the Frosty North sect. He helped Yi Ling up and a gust of cold air instantly spread towards him. He was shocked and quickly released his kindness sword intent to resist the cold air. However, he was surprised to find that his kindness sword intent was actually unable to resist the cold air. The cold air around Yi Ling was even more terrifying than before. "Brother?" At this time, Yi Ling suddenly threw herself into Yi Xian's arms. She hugged Yi Xian tightly and cried like a child. No one knew how many days and nights she had missed her brother. In the frigid North sect, she only did 2 things a day. The first was to cultivate and the second was to miss her brother. No one knew what her brother meant to her. For Yi Xian, his younger sister was the biggest taboo in his life, and for Yi Ling wasn't it the same? Yi Xian gently hugged Yi Ling. At the moment he was calm and happy. At this moment he was very satisfied. The people of the frigid North sect just stared at the siblings. Shen Weiyang's face was a little gloomy. Actually, she was quite fearful of Yi Xian as well. Because how could someone who was so wanted by the Realm Defense Alliance and still alive be an ordinary person? Especially Kuraki Academy. The Kuraki Academy of the Central Divine Prefecture wasn't inferior to the frigid North sect, but it was now inferior to even a third-rate power. Mysterious. In Shen Weiyang's opinion, Yi Xian was undoubtedly quite mysterious. Meanwhile, Yi Xian wiped off the tears on Yi Ling's face and smiled. "Big brother will take you away." Yi Ling nodded and held tightly onto Yi Xian's arm. "Go." Lu Yun suddenly laughed coldly. "Yi Xian, you seem to have forgotten that this is the frigid North sect, not your Pine Prefecture." Yi Xian suddenly turned around and glared angrily at Lu Yun. "The frigid North sect is nothing. I don't even fear the Realm Defense Alliance, so why would I fear your frigid North sect?" Lu Yun flared up with rage and was about to attack. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly pointed his sword at Lu Yun. "Old bastard, try and touch me. Let's see if your frigid North sect can survive until tomorrow." "How dare you!" Lu Yun was furious and was about to attack. Meanwhile, Shen Weiyang suddenly said, "Stop." Lu Yun turned around to look at Shen Weiyang and said angrily, "He insulted me like this, so why should I stop?" As she spoke, she was about to attack. However, a wave of pressure pressed down upon her. It was Shen Weiyang's pressure. Lu Yun turned around to look at Shen Weiyang. Shen Weiyang spoke via voice transmission. "Why don't you ask him how he got into my frigid North sect? How could he have snuck into my frigid North sect without any help? Would the Realm Defense Alliance play such tricks if he didn't have any backing?" Lu Yun gradually calmed down when she heard this. The Realm Defense Alliance. Only then did she remember that even the Realm Defense Alliance couldn't do anything to this person. Yi Xian didn't care about Lu Yun and the people of the frigid North sect. He grabbed Yi Ling and turned to leave. Just then, Shen Weiyang suddenly appeared in front of him and Yi Ling Shen Weiyang stared at Yi Xian. She is the Holy Virgin of the Frigid North sect. Where are you taking her? Yi Xian said indifferently, I am her brother. I can take her wherever I want. Shen Weiyang said coldly, Yi Xian, don't be unreasonable. Making trouble out of nothing? Yi Xian's expression was ferocious. If not for the fact that the Frigid North sect did her a favor and that you made her kneel down, I would have destroyed the Frigid North sect a long time ago. Shen Weiyang narrowed her eyes and there was murderous intent in them. Yi Xian, I know that you have a powerful background. But do you really think the Frigid North sect is afraid of you? Yi Xian didn't speak. He pointed his sword at Shen Weiyang. Let's fight one-on-one. Hearing this, Shen Weiyang's expression turned cold. How could she tolerate such a provocation? She slammed her palm down and a strong wave of coldness pressed down on Yi Xian. Yi Xian stomped his right foot and a strong wave of sword will swept out from his body. Evil sword will. At the same time Yi Xian slashed down with his sword. One strike to decide life and death. Seeing this, Shen Weiyang's lips curled into a mocking smile. She moved her finger and the power in Yi Xian's sword began to disintegrate. Spatial disintegration. The scariest part of the true defense level. But at this moment, a mysterious force suddenly wrapped around Yi Xian's sword, as well as the power and sword will in his sword. Spatial disintegration was ineffective. Shen Weiyang was shocked. At this moment Yi Xian's sword descended. Boom. The wave of coldness shattered instantly and turned into a wave of air that shook the surroundings. Yi Xian was pushed back a few meters while Yi Ling hurried to him and said anxiously, Brother, are you hurt? Yi Xian shook his head but he was excited. It really worked. Before coming here, he'd imagined using the Space Dao Law spatial cage to protect his sword technique so that he could fight against a true defense-level powerhouse. But he hadn't expected it to work. Because his spatial cage had forcefully blocked Shen Weiyang's spatial disintegration. Without the spatial disintegration, a true defense-level powerhouse wasn't so terrifying to Yi Xian. Opposite Yi Xian, Shen Weiyang stared at Yi Xian. Besides disbelief, there was a trace of fear in her eyes. How did you do it? At this moment she was extremely shocked. Because her spatial disintegration had actually been ineffective. Ineffective. This was the first time she had encountered such a situation. Yi Xian didn't answer Shen Weiyang. He pulled Yi Ling and was about to leave when Granny Lung suddenly appeared in front of him and Yi Ling. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Yi Ling suddenly said softly, Brother, Granny Lung is very good to me. Hearing that, Yi Xian's expression softened and he bowed to Shen Weiyang. Thank you for taking care of Ling all this time, senior. Yi Xian will remember this. Granny Lung sighed softly. I'm from the Frosty North sect. If you really remember this, you should let her stay in the Frosty North sect. Staying in the Frosty North sect is the best place for her. Yi Xian shook his head. I don't want her to suffer any grievances. How can she grow if she doesn't suffer? Granny Lung retorted. She has to grow up eventually. She should learn to be independent and strong. If she stays with you all the time, your pampering will harm her instead. What do you think? Yi Xian fell silent. Seeing that Yi Xian was silent, Granny Lung was relieved. She had finally realized something. Yi Xian was a man who could be persuaded by reason but not cowed by force. If you talked to him nicely, he would listen to you. However, if you tried to threaten him and force him, he would be even fiercer than you. No, this guy would start a fight if you didn't agree with him. At this moment, Granny Lung looked at Yi Ling. You've been devouring the treasure of the Frosty North sect for some time now. You'll be able to use it in a few days. By then you'll be even more powerful. If you leave the Frosty North sect now, all your previous efforts will be in vain without the suppression of the cold here. Yi Ling lowered her head. I want to stay with my brother, Granny Lung smiled and said, but you're not as strong as your brother now. You won't be able to help him if you stay by his side. Not only will you not be able to help him, but you might even become his burden. Do you want that? She knew Yi Ling's temper very well. She couldn't force him. She might look weak but she was actually very stubborn. Are we just going to let what happened just now go? At this moment Lu Yun suddenly said, Yi Xian barged into the Frosty North sect and attacked the sect master. He completely ignored the Frosty North sect and, she then pointed at Yi Ling who was not far away. She's the holy lady of the Frosty North sect, but she's with an outsider. What right does she have to be the holy lady of the Frosty North sect? My brother isn't an outsider. Yi Ling glared at Lu Yun. He's my brother. Lu Yun said ferociously, is your brother more important than the Frosty North sect? Yi Ling was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly dashed forward with his sword, and a beam of sword light slashed at Lu Yun. One strike to decide life and death. Lu Yun's expression changed. She hadn't expected Yi Xian to attack. However, she wasn't afraid at all. She pointed with her finger and an icicle suddenly shot out from the tip of her finger. At the same time, the space around Yi Xian's sword started to distort. Spatial distortion. Spatial manipulation. She's only at the spell manipulation realm. Yi Xian was stunned. He'd thought that Lu Yun was at least at the spell manipulation realm, but she was only at the spell manipulation realm. Yi Xian didn't think too much and twisted his right hand. The spatial energy was shattered and the space returned to normal. At the same time, Yi Xian's sword broke Lu Yun's icicle and pressed against her forehead. Everyone was dumbfounded. One strike. He subdued Lu Yun with one strike? Yi Xian was actually surprised as well because he didn't expect the great elder of Frosty North sect to be so weak. Without much thought, Yi Xian patted Lu Yun's ugly face with his sword. Are you silly? Let me ask you, are you silly? My sister has such a powerful brother, isn't it a good thing for your Frosty North sect? You even King offended my brother and sister. Tell me, is your brain filled with sh*t? Damn it, even Mo Yunchi is smarter than you. Everyone, at this moment a lady suddenly ran in. Sect master, the people from Sky Cloud City are here. They want us to hand over the sacred lady. Hearing that, Yi Ling hurriedly looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian grinned and patted his shoulder. Don't be afraid, even if the sky falls, I'll carry it. P.S. I asked you to come out and some of you really fought. Are you demons? Don't you have anything to say to me? Chapter 271. Brother will bear it. Yi Ling looked at Yi Xian and her heart was filled with happiness. She walked towards Yi Xian and gently hugged Yi Xian's arm and gave a sweet smile. I'll bear it together with brother. Hearing that, Yi Xian couldn't help but burst out laughing. At this moment, Shen Weiyang suddenly said, this time round, just Sky Cloud City alone has at least 3 true Imperial Magic Realm experts. And in the dark, there must be other strong practitioners from the Realm Protection Alliance. If you bring her out, the both of you will definitely die today. Yi Xian smiled. Otherwise, what should we do? Shen Weiyang looked straight at Yi Xian and transmitted her profound qi. Yi Xian, you should be very clear that the Realm Protection Alliance's real target is you. As long as you go out, then Yi Ling will be safe. Yi Xian shook his head and laughed. What you mean is I should surrender and let them do whatever they want to me in exchange for my sister's safety, right? Shen Weiyang replied calmly, that will depend on your own choice. If I surrender but they still refuse to let my sister off? Yi Xian asked. Shen Weiyang frowned slightly, their target is only you. Yi Xian shook his head and interrupted Shen Weiyang's words, surrender? How stupid do I have to be to do such a silly thing? He had never placed his hopes on others, especially on the enemy. Believing that the enemy would be benevolent? Only a fool would believe that. Yi Xian walked in front of Shen Weiyang. Now, Cold North Sect has 2 choices. First, protect my sister and directly send out their top exponents to start a war with Sky Cloud City and the Realm Protection Alliance. Second, I will bring my sister away and all the consequences will be borne by the both of us. Attitude. What he wanted now was Cold North Sect's attitude. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the entire scene suddenly quietened down. Yi Xian's attitude was very clear. Leaving Yi Ling behind would mean that Cold North Sect would start a war with Sky Cloud City and the Realm Protection Alliance. If he chose the second option, it meant that Yi Xian would take Yi Ling with him, and nothing would happen to the Frigid North Sect. 2 choices. This was a big problem for the Frigid North Sect. Because the Frigid North Sect had already paid a huge price to train Yi Ling. If they gave up now, it would be a huge loss. But if they didn't give up, it meant that they had to face Sky Cloud City and the Realm Protection Alliance. The current Frigid North Sect might be able to fight against these 2 forces, but they would definitely lose in the end. Should he fight or not? Everyone in the surroundings gazed at Shen Weiyang. Yi Xian was also waiting for Shen Weiyang's answer. In fact, the Frigid North Sect had a third option, which was to capture Yi Xian and hand Yi Xian over to the Realm Protection Alliance. In that case, the Realm Protection Alliance might let go of Yi Ling. However, Shen Weiyang didn't dare to touch Yi Xian. If she touched Yi Xian, not only would she offend the forces behind Yi Xian, she would also completely offend Yi Ling. A sacred lady who hated the sect, she didn't even dare to think about the consequences. At this moment, Lu Yun suddenly said, Sect Master, the sacred lady is a human, but aren't the thousands of Frigid North Sect disciples also human? If a war breaks out, how many of them can survive? Yi Ling, who was standing beside Yi Xian, stared at Lu Yun. Brother, this old hag is very evil. Hearing Yiling's words, Lu Yun was furious, but she didn't dare to make a move, not even a word of threat. Because Yi Xian's power was just too terrifying. Not far away, Shen Weiyang looked around and saw that all the frigid North Sect disciples were looking at her. After a while, she sighed and turned around. Take her away. Take Yiling away. As soon as she said that, Lu Yun instantly laughed and some of the frigid North Sect disciples around them heaved a sigh of relief. However, some of the frigid North Sect disciples were a little sad. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. They still had some feelings for Yiling, especially Granny Lung. The moment Shen Weiyang made her decision, she quickly said, Sect Master, she is the future hope of the frigid North Sect. If we give up on her, the frigid North Sect. Lu Yun shook her head. She is a human, but are the rest of the frigid North Sect not human? If thousands of frigid North Sect disciples die because of her, then we are the real sinners of the sect. Granny Lung wanted to say something but Lu Yun shook her head. The frigid North Sect can't start a war with the Realm Defense Alliance and Sky Cloud City. Even if we start a war, we might not be able to protect her. And her heart is on the outsider's side, so there's not much point in keeping her. Lu Yun quickly said, Sect Master is right. Even if the frigid North Sect starts a war for her, if we lose, not only will she die but everyone in the frigid North Sect will also die. It doesn't matter if we die, but if the frigid North Sect disappears from the world, how will we face our ancestors? Granny Lung looked at the crowd and shook her head with a sigh. If the frigid North Sect gives up on her, do you know how the cultivators of the Divine Central Continent will look at us? The cultivators of the Divine Central Continent will think that the frigid North Sect is afraid of death and that we're willing to give up on our most monstrous genius to protect ourselves. Death isn't scary, what's scary is losing the courage of the frigid North Sect. Lu Yun said coldly, Courage? Is fighting the Realm Defense Alliance considered courage? The frigid North Sect has existed for more than 1,000 years. Once we start a war with the Realm Defense Alliance, the frigid North Sect may cease to exist. Is courage more important, or the thousands of disciples of the frigid North Sect more important? Granny Lung ignored Lu Yun and looked at Shen Weiyang. Shen Weiyang remained silent. Next to her, Yi Xian pulled Yiling out of the hall. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian stopped at the entrance of the hall with Yiling. He turned around and said, We siblings clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. The frigid North Sect must have spent a lot to nurture my sister. We won't take advantage of her. With that, he pointed a finger and a storage ring flew to Shen Weiyang. Shen Weiyang was about to refuse, but when she scanned the ring with her divine sense and discovered that there were 1 billion supreme-grade spirit stones inside, she immediately swallowed her words. 1 billion supreme-grade spirit stones. This was not a small amount, especially in this era where spirit chi was thin. This many supreme-grade spirit stones could be used for too many things. Shen Weiyang put the ring away and glanced at Yi Xian and Yiling. In the end, she looked at Yiling, You have the sacred relic of the frigid North Sect with you. It's not a good time to take it by force. I hope that you can return it in the future. Yiling nodded. I'll return it to the frigid North Sect if I can. Shen Weiyang nodded and did not say anything else. Just when Yi Xian was about to leave with Yiling pointed at Granny Lung. Brother, Granny Lung treats me very well. Yi Xian rubbed Yiling's head gently. Then he pointed his finger and a storage ring flew in front of Granny Lung. There were 1 billion supreme-grade spirit stones in the storage ring. Granny Lung was moved. 1 billion supreme-grade spirit stones was actually quite a fortune to her. No, it should be a lot. Just then Yiling waved at Granny Lung. Granny Lung, brother, and I will come back to see you in the future. With that, the two siblings left the hall. In the hall, Granny Lung sighed. Actually, she had been worried since the beginning that the frigid North Sect would not be able to withstand the pressure from the Realm Protection Alliance. However, her worry became reality in the end. This time, the frigid North Sect had not only lost a super genius, but also lost their pride and dignity. Outside the hall, Yi Xian held Yiling's hand and walked out. Yiling's face was filled with a bright smile. On the way, Yiling suddenly asked, Brother, if the frigid North Sect starts a war with the Realm Protection Alliance because of me, will you really let me stay in the frigid North Sect? Yi Xian nodded. This chapter is not finished. Please continue. Yes, because staying in the frigid North Sect will benefit you a lot. Actually, there was something that he did not say. If the frigid North Sect was really willing to fight the Realm Protection Alliance to the death for Yiling, then he would go out and attract all the hatred to himself. Not only would he not let Yiling face the Realm Protection Alliance, he would also not let the frigid North Sect face the Realm Protection Alliance. What Yi Xian wanted was an attitude from the frigid North sect. An attitude towards Yi Ling. And he was disappointed. He knew that if it was not for him, if Yi Ling stayed in the frigid North sect, she might be abandoned by the frigid North sect in the future. As if he had thought of something, he lowered his head and looked at Yi Ling. Is it the frigid North sect's fault? Yi Ling lowered her head slightly and kept quiet. After a while she looked up at Yi Xian. Do you think I'm wrong? Yi Xian rubbed Yi Ling's little head and smiled. Not at all. Remember, no one is born to owe anyone anything. The frigid North sect does not owe me, nor do they owe you. If they are willing to fight the Realm Protection Alliance to the death for you, I will be grateful for it for the rest of my life. If they are not willing, it's all right. We will face our own matters. Yi Ling nodded her little head. I understand. Oh brother, sometimes I feel that you are very long-winded, but I also like to hear you being long-winded. Hearing that, Yi Xian instantly burst out laughing. He doted on Yi Ling, but he would not spoil Yi Ling. Because spoiling a person would often be harming the person. Just at this moment the siblings stopped. In the distant sky, stood a middle-aged man. Beside him there was a young man. Sky Cloud City Lord Lu Feng and Young City Lord Lu Xianming. Behind the two of them stood 3 elders. The 3 of them were all true Imperial Realm experts. Including Lu Feng, there were a total of 4 true Imperial Realm experts. Other than that, there were 10 over people around them. These people were all in the Imperial Realm. This lineup was enough to easily take down Azure Province. But in the Divine Central Continent, it was probably just average. Not far in front of Yi Xian, Lu Xianming glared at Yi Xian. Bastard, did you do this? Yi Xian frowned. Who are you talking about, bastard? You, of course. Lu Xianming said fiercely, you lowly bastard. At this point he was stunned. Something seemed wrong. Opposite him Yi Xian nodded. He said seriously, that scumbag is talking about me? Beside Yi Xian, Yi Ling could not help but cover her mouth and laugh. Ark! Lu Xianming roared, then directly rushed towards Yi Xian. The moment Lu Xianming rushed out, Lu Feng's expression changed greatly. He was about to make a move, but at this time not far away Lu Xianming stopped. Between his brows there was a sword. Lu Xianming looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. He did not expect that he would be defeated just like that. He did not even have the strength to fight back. Lu Feng stared at Yi Xian. If you dare to hurt a hair on his head. At this time Yi Xian held the sword and slashed down. Swoosh. Lu Xuanming's entire arm was sent flying. Lu Xianming immediately screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Yi Xian looked at Lu Feng and smiled viciously. How dare you have designs on my sister? Do you know how to write the word death? As he said this he swung the sword. Swoosh. Lu Xuanming's head was sent flying. At the same time Yi Xian quickly swung the sword. Soon, Lu Xuanming's body was instantly disintegrated into the word death. Yi Xian turned around and pointed at Lu Feng with the sword. Do you understand how to write it like this? End of this chapter. Chapter 272. Rage. Yi Xian was naturally enraged. Whoever dared to harm his sister, Yi Xian would not rest until he was dead. For his sister, Yi Xian was not afraid of anything. Nearby, Lu Feng's expression turned savage when he saw Lu Xianming being dismembered. In the next moment he charged at Yi Xian with a shake of his body. Due to his incredible speed, Lu Feng caused the space around him to tremble. It was a terrifying sight to behold. It was rare to see someone in the true Imperial Magic Realm to be able to move so quickly. If it had been the Yi Xian of the past, he would not have been able to fight back against a cultivator of this level. But now, with the law of space, he could fight against a true Imperial Magic Realm cultivator. As soon as Lu Feng disappeared from where he stood, Yi Xian leaped up and slashed down with his sword. Boom! In the sky, along with the sound of an explosion, Yi Xian retreated rapidly. This time he retreated nearly 1,000 feet. However, Lu Feng was also pushed back more than 200 zhang. In the distance Lu Feng looked at his palm. His palm was covered in cracks, which were caused by Yi Xian's sword. Lu Feng narrowed his eyes. There was less contempt in his eyes and more seriousness. Yi Xian, on the other hand, was excited. He realized that after borrowing the law of space, the gap between him and a true Imperial Magic Realm cultivator was not that great. He could fight back. With this thought in mind, Yi Xian's fighting spirit soared. He pointed at Lu Feng and pointed at him. The sound of a sword suddenly rang out. Then, a flying sword suddenly flew out from the sword case on his back and slashed at Lu Feng. Lu Feng was expressionless. He pulled with both hands and the space in front of him immediately distorted. When the flying sword entered the distorted space, it was immediately blocked, unable to move even an inch further. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. A true Dharma realm expert's use of the power of space was even more terrifying than he had imagined. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian pointed with his finger and the sword in front of Lu Feng was immediately sent flying back to him. Yi Xian reached out to grab the sword and abruptly stomped on the ground with his right foot. His entire body transformed into a streak of sword light and shot forward. A ray of light flashed through the battlefield. In the distance, Lu Feng's face was incomparably cold. To a true defensive magic realm expert, everyone below him was nothing more than an ant. After all, there was a qualitative difference between a true defensive magic realm expert and an ordinary one. At this moment, the Yi Xian in front of him was not even in the Dharma defensive realm, but he dared to attack him twice. To him this was an insult. However, Lu Feng did not look down on Yi Xian because he knew that there were some people in this world that could not be looked at normally. Lu Feng gently pressed his right hand forward, causing the space in front of him to tremble violently. Following which, the space began to compress layer by layer, forming an invisible barrier in an instant. Spatial barrier. And this barrier had forcefully blocked Yi Xian's sword. Seeing that his attack had failed, Yi Xian instantly retreated over 30 meters, increasing the distance between him and Lu Feng. Lu Feng stared fixedly at Yi Xian. No matter how monstrous you are, the gap between our realms is still not. Meanwhile, his voice came to an abrupt halt because Yi Xian had already arrived before him. At the same time, a sword had already chopped down from above his head. This strike was even more terrifying than the previous ones, and the sword had already turned pitch black. Evil will sword intent. Even though he had been caught off guard by Yi Xian's attack, Lu Feng remained calm and fearless. When the sword was still a dozen or so inches away from his head, he lightly twisted his right hand. In an instant, the space above his head where the sword was turned into a spatial vortex. At the same time, the energy on Yi Xian's sword and the evil will sword intent began to break down at a frenzy. The power of spatial disintegration. But at this moment, a strange change occurred. A mysterious energy suddenly enveloped Yi Xian's sword, and this energy actually blocked the power of spatial disintegration. Lu Feng was greatly shocked when he saw this. Before he could even react, Yi Xian's sword had already slashed down. Boom. Before the eyes of the surrounding crowd, Lu Feng was directly sent flying several dozen meters away. The expressions of everyone in the surroundings became solemn when they saw this scene, especially those true Imperial Law Realm experts. Because they had never imagined that Yi Xian's sword would actually be able to ignore the power of spatial disintegration. Opposite Yi Xian, Lu Feng stared fixedly at Yi Xian. How did you do it? Spatial disintegration was the most powerful technique of true Imperial Law Realm experts. If spatial disintegration was ineffective against Yi Xian, then from a certain perspective, Yi Xian could already be considered as a true Imperial Law Realm expert. Of course, to measure a true Imperial Law Realm expert's strength, not only spatial disintegration, but also battle awareness, equipment, martial techniques, cultivation techniques, and so on. Yi Xian sneered, "How did you do it? Lu Feng, do you know why your older brother, Supreme Lord Lu, did not come personally to capture me?" Hearing this, Lu Feng frowned. "What do you mean?" "What do I mean?" Yi Xian's sneer widened and he pointed his sword at the surroundings. "If I'm not wrong, there should be other experts from the Realm Defense Alliance in the surroundings. But this Supreme Lord Lu of the Realm Defense Alliance did not come personally, right?" At this point he raised his head towards the sky, and a trace of savagery appeared on his face. "Supreme Lord Lu, Realm Defense Alliance, do you really think you can dominate the firmament world?" At this time an old man appeared not far from Yi Xian. This person was the Grand Elder of the Realm Defense Alliance, Emoshio. In the Realm Defense Alliance, his status was second only to Supreme Lord Lu. Emoshio coldly glared at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, you may be relying on that mysterious master of yours, but do you really think that our Realm Defense Alliance cannot deal with your master?" "Deal with?" Yi Xian grinned. 1,000 years ago, you couldn't do anything to my master, let alone now. 1,000 years ago. Emoshio's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian softly said, "Nothing much. It seems that your Realm Defense Alliance is here because you have the confidence to deal with my master. If that's the case, then follow me." As he finished speaking, he walked to Yi Ling's side, pulling Yi Ling's little hand as they walked into the distance. Emoshio and the others exchanged glances. A moment later, Emoshio commanded, "Follow him." Thus, in this way Yi Xian led a group of true defensive law realm experts towards the mountain. Yi Xian walked very slowly without the slightest nervousness. Along the way he even talked and laughed with his little sister Yi Ling, as if he had someone to rely on. Behind Yi Xian, Mo Xiao and the others looked somewhat solemn. The calmer Yi Xian appeared, the more it meant that Yi Xian had nothing to fear, and it also meant that Yi Xian was not afraid of the Realm Defense Alliance at all. Behind Yi Xian there was more than meets the eye. Mo Xiao and the others looked dignified, their hearts secretly on guard. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, Yi Xian led Mo Xiao and the others out of the wintry North Territory, and then came to a mountain. Before long Yi Xian stopped. Not far in front of him there was a thatched hut. Yi Xian bowed deeply towards the thatched hut, and his expression was extremely respectful. Seeing Yi Xian bow, Yi Ling hurriedly bowed as well. Seeing Yi Xian and his little sister bow, Mo Xiao and the others looked at the thatched hut. Their divine senses swept over the thatched hut, and in next to no time, everyone's expressions instantly became solemn. Because when their divine senses swept over the thatched hut, they didn't sense anything. How could this be possible? Mo Xiao's expression was extremely solemn, and his hands were trembling slightly. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, "Master, they're here." But that exalted Lord Lu didn't come. As he spoke, he concentrated and listened carefully. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian nodded, "I understand." As soon as he finished speaking, he pulled Yi Ling's hand and walked to the front of the thatched hut, then pushed the door open and entered. When Yi Xian and Yi Ling entered the thatched hut, astonishment appeared in the eyes of Mo Xiao and the others. Because they noticed that Yi Xian and Yi Ling's auras had vanished. Lu Feng, who stood by Mo Xiao's side, said in a low voice, "Elder Mo, who exactly is that person behind Yi Xian?" Mo Xiao said in a low voice, "A person that even exalted lords are extremely fearful of." Lu Feng's expression instantly became slightly unsightly. A person that even exalted Lord Lu is fearful of? How strong would such a person have to be able to make an expert like exalted Lord Lu feel fearful? Right at this moment, the thatched hut's door suddenly opened and a black-robed man walked out. The black-robed man had his hands behind his back, and his entire body was enveloped by a black robe, so his face couldn't be seen at all. When the black-robed man appeared, Mo Xiao and the others were first stunned, and in the next moment, their eyes were filled with disbelief. Because the black-robed man was right in front of them, but they felt as if the black-robed man didn't exist. And when their divine sense swept past the black-robed man, it was actually empty, and they couldn't sense anything at all. However, this person just had to be standing right in front of them. Even someone as strong as exalted Lord Lu hadn't reached such a level. Mo Xiao forcefully suppressed the shock in his heart, and with great effort he maintained a calm expression as he cupped his fists. "What is your name?" The black-robed man spoke in a hoarse voice. "You don't have the qualifications to know this lord's name. Where is that exalted Lord Lu? Tell him to come and die." Exalted Lord Lu. Mo Xiao glanced at the black-robed man and said in a low voice, "Although your excellency is strong, my Realm Protection Alliance will not allow anyone to bully and humiliate us." Bully and humiliate? The black-robed man sneered, "Is this lord bullying your Realm Protection Alliance, or is it your Realm Protection Alliance bullying this lord? You've acted against my disappointing disciple time and time again. What, is it very comfortable to bully the weak?" Mo Xiao was about to speak when the black-robed man suddenly flicked his sleeves. "Scram immediately. Go back and tell that little Lu that this lord will be going to the Realm Protection Alliance to take his dog head in a few days. Tell him to wait." Hearing this, Mo Xiao and the others' expressions became incomparably ugly. Scram? They'd come here to fight, yet they were supposed to scram just like that? But if they didn't scram, then not to mention others, even Mo Xiao himself wouldn't dare attack. Because this person was truly too unfathomable. Facing the black-robed man was like facing the vast starry sky. Even if he had a clone as a trump card, he still didn't have the slightest confidence in his heart. But it would truly be too shameful if he returned with his tail between his legs. As soon as the black-robed man finished speaking, he directly turned around and walked towards the cottage. Meanwhile, Mo Xiao gritted his teeth and said, "I want to seek guidance from your excellency." Seek guidance from him. The black-robed man suddenly stopped moving. "Yes, I asked around. If you go to a KTV and become a young master, then you can earn at least 1,000 a night. Brothers, don't be sad if I don't update anymore one day. That proves that I have a better future. All of you have to be happy for me, understand?" Chapter 273. Let's exchange a few moves. Obviously, Mo Xiao wanted to test the black-robed man's strength. The black-robed man stood in front of the wooden hut for a while before shaking his head. You don't have the qualifications. You are only fit to fight my disciple. As he finished speaking, he walked into the wooden hut. Mo Xiao's expression was slightly ugly. At this moment, Yi Xian walked out from the wooden hut. Yi Xian walked in front of the black-robed man. If you want to challenge my master, then you have to pass me first. Mo Xiao stared at Yi Xian. You don't have the qualifications. As he finished speaking, he glanced at the wooden hut and said, if you don't want to exchange pointers with me, then please forgive me for offending you. As he spoke, he was about to attack. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, do you really want to know my master's background? Mo Xiao looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed, forget it. Since you want to know so much, then I will tell you. As he finished speaking, he pointed with his finger and a sword flew in front of Mo Xiao. Exquisite spirit sword. No, its original name should be Ling Xiao. When he saw this sword, Mo Xiao was slightly stunned and didn't understand. But when he saw the two words on the sword, it was like he was struck by lightning and his mind went blank. Ling Xiao. This sword was the sword of the Firmament Sword Master. Firmament Sword Master. Who in the Firmament world didn't know this person? That year, it was this person who suppressed the Realm Defense Alliance for almost 100 years. At this moment, Mo Xiao's heart was like a raging sea. Yi Xian didn't say anything else. He smiled coldly and then recalled his sword. He turned around and walked back into the hut. Only Yi Ling was in the hut. When she saw Yi Xian, Yi Ling blinked and smiled like a crescent moon. Yi Xian sat beside Yi Ling and held Yi Ling's hand. Just like that, the two of them waited quietly. If Mo Xiao didn't stop, then the two of them would have to fight with their lives on the line. Outside the hut, Mo Xiao's expression was extremely ugly. He didn't expect that the Firmament Sword Master was behind Yi Xian. Firmament Sword Master. 1,000 years ago, the Firmament Sword Master suddenly disappeared. At that time, many people guessed that the Firmament Sword Master had left Azure World or had fallen. Mo Xiao didn't expect that the Sword Master hadn't fallen and had returned to world. This wasn't good. Mo Xiao directly turned around and led everyone away. Now he had to report this matter to the higher-ups. One had to know that Song Jie Sword Head didn't have a good relationship with the World Protecting Alliance. Especially this time, the Realm Defense Alliance was against Yi Xian, and Yi Xian was the disciple of the Firmament Sword Master, Mo Yi Xian, and Yi Xiao. With Yi Mo with Feng and Mo. Sword with Mo was Mo. If he used it once and killed Mo Xiao and the others, another expert would come. At that time he and his sister would be finished. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian pulled Yi Ling out of the hut and fled towards the vast mountain range. Brother, you still don't open your eyes. Is it because you haven't finished cultivating the peerless technique? And there's still some time. If I succeed, will I be very powerful? Yes. I can kill High Lord Lu with one look. Wu. Although it sounds like I'm bragging, I still believe in brother. Yi Xian. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Xian suddenly stopped and turned around. Not far from his right stood a woman. The woman was wearing a green dress and a veil. At this moment, the woman was staring at him. The veiled woman slowly walked up to Yi Xian and Yi Ling. She sized up Yi Xian. True 10,000 Dharma realm. Sword sovereign. 2 sword intense. Not bad indeed. Yi Xian said, you are? The veiled woman said, Xian Gate Mu Xiaoling. Xian Gate. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He had naturally heard of this force. Among the lower realms of the Central Divine Continent, this Xian Gate was ranked number 1. The past number 1 on the monster ranking had all come from the Xian Gate. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and asked, what's the matter? The veiled woman sized him up. I'm here to recruit people. Recruit people. Yi Xian was stunned. Then he turned to Yi Ling and said with some pride, look, your brother is so outstanding. I've just arrived at the Central Divine Continent and I've already caught the eye of the Xian Gate. Yi Ling smiled brilliantly. Big brother is amazing. Of course. Yi Xian said seriously, although I've been very low-key, there's a saying? If it's gold, it will shine. I, your brother, am. Excuse me. At this moment, Mu Xiaoling, who was not far away, suddenly said, I'm not here for you. Speaking of this, she pointed to Yi Ling. I'm here for her. Yi Ling was stunned. Yi Xian was also stunned. At this moment, time seemed to freeze. After a moment, Yi Xian laughed. After relieving himself of the embarrassment, he gently rubbed Yi Ling's little head. Your Xian Gate has a good eye. Speaking of this, he turned to look at Mu Xiaoling. Actually, I'm not bad. Won't you consider it? Mu Xiaoling shook her head. No. Yi Xian sighed softly. This is 2F** king frustrating. Mu Xiaoling glanced at Yi Xian. It's not that you're not good enough, it's that you're too good. If you didn't have a conflict with the Realm Protection Alliance, entering my Xian Gate would naturally not be a problem. Unfortunately. Yi Xian calmly said, Oh, so you're afraid of the Realm Protection Alliance just like the Frigid North sect? Mu Xiaoling sneered. What is the Frigid North sect? How can they be compared to my Xian Gate? And my Xian Gate is not afraid of the Realm Protection Alliance. The person who wants to kill you is not Lord Lu, but someone above Lord Lu. If we accept you now, it's clear that we're not giving face to the Realm Protection Alliance. At that time both forces will be embarrassed. My Xian Gate is not afraid of the Realm Protection Alliance, but we don't want to become enemies with them. Yi Xian lightly said, Now, the person you want to accept is my sister. Mu Xiaoling shook her head. As long as we don't accept you, no matter how overbearing the Realm Protection Alliance is, they won't take the initiative to fight with my Xian Gate. Moreover, when the time comes, we will secretly train her, even the Realm Protection Alliance won't be able to find her. Speaking of this, she looked at Yi Ling. This time, I came to the Frigid North sect because I was entrusted by someone to find her. Entrusted by someone? Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, Entrusted by who? Mu Xiaoling looked at Yi Xian. Senior sister. Senior sister. Yi Xian and his younger sister were instantly struck dumb. And Lanxiu. However, the brother and sister were still a little uncertain, so Yi Xian quickly asked, Is it in Lanxiu? Mu Xiaoling nodded. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, She has already entered the Xian Gate? Mu Xiaoling nodded slightly. Yes. This time she should have come personally, but she was delayed, so she asked me to come to the Frigid North sect to pick up your sister. Of course, if the Frigid North sect and the Realm Protection Alliance were to fight to the death, I would come forward to mediate, but I didn't expect that you would appear halfway. Yi Xian was about to speak when Yi Ling suddenly said, I am willing to enter the Xian Gate. Yi Xian looked at Yi Ling looked at Yi Xian and grinned. Brother, I know that if I continue to follow you, I will become your burden. I don't want to drag you down, I really don't want to drag you down. As she spoke, her face was already covered with tears. Yi Xian shook his head. He held Yi Ling in his arms. Silly girl, if you follow me, you will never become my burden. Yi Ling hugged Yi Xian tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. I also want to follow you, but Grandma Ling is right, I can't always rely on you, I have to learn to grow. Yi Xian was about to say something. Not far away, Mu Xiaoling suddenly said, The Realm Protection Alliance will not let you go, they will continue to attack you. Keeping her by your side is not a good thing for you and her. Looking at Yi Ling's tears, Yi Xian's heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. Brother, don't blame me. At this time Yi Ling suddenly looked up at him. She wiped the tears on her face and revealed a smile. The Xian Gate still has Sister In. I will accompany Sister In, you don't have to worry about anything. Yi Xian grinned. He was not an indecisive person. He was very clear that letting Yi Ling join the Xian Gate was indeed a good choice. Because the matter between him and the Realm Protection Alliance was not over. If Yi Ling followed him, it would be very, very dangerous. Of course, if the Xian Gate did not have An Lanxiu, he would not let Yi Ling join the Xian Gate no matter what. Because this force was too mysterious. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian faced Mu Xiaoling. You said that Little An asked you to come, do you have proof? Mu Xiaoling flicked her finger. A small wooden figure appeared in front of Yi Ling and Yi Xian. The small wooden figure and An Lanxiu looked at each other. It was the one Yi Xian had given to An Lanxiu. Seeing this small wooden figure, the last trace of doubt in Yi Xian's heart was dispelled. Yi Xian faced Yi Ling grinned. Brother, don't worry. I will take good care of myself. And there's also Sister In. Yi Xian nodded. Then she took out a storage ring and handed it to Yi Ling. Inside the storage ring, there were 1 billion top-grade spirit stones and a snow lotus. This snow lotus was an extremely cold object. For Yi Ling it would definitely be of great use. Yi Ling did not refuse. She accepted the storage ring and then walked in front of Mu Xiaoling. She smiled sweetly. Sister, let's go. Mu Xiaoling glanced at Yi Ling and nodded slightly. Then she pulled Yi Ling. At this moment, a cold air suddenly attacked her. Mu Xiaoling's expression did not change. Her lily-white hands trembled slightly. That cold air suddenly disappeared without a trace. At the same time, a blue circle suddenly appeared under her feet. Soon her and Mu Xiaoling's bodies became illusory. From beginning to end, Yi Ling did not look back at Yi Xian. Not long after, Yi Ling and Mu Xiaoling disappeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian stood in the same place as if he had been petrified. He did not recover for a long time. In a certain space, tears kept flowing down Yi Ling's face. No matter how she wiped them, the tears would not stop flowing. Mu Xiaoling looked down at Yi Ling. "Why didn't you turn around and say goodbye to him?" Yi Ling wiped the tears on her face. "If I turned around and saw brother, I couldn't bear to leave him." As she said that, she hugged Mu Xiaoling and cried. "I couldn't bear to leave brother. I really couldn't bear to." Chapter 274. No one knew what her brother meant to Yi Ling. Everything. Her brother was her everything. She really wanted to stay by her brother's side, but she knew that if she stayed by her brother's side, with her current strength, she would definitely become her brother's burden. Only when she left would her brother not have any worries. Moreover, she could go to Shen Gate to cultivate and become stronger so that she could help her brother in the future. However, she really couldn't bear to leave. Therefore, she didn't even have the courage to look back at Yi Xian. Because she was afraid that after seeing him, she wouldn't want to leave. Mu Xiaoling gently rubbed Yi Ling's little head. "Parting is for a better reunion. Don't be sad. Cultivate well. Only when you are strong can you do what you want to do." As she said that, she turned back and looked. Actually, Yi Xian was totally qualified to join Shen Gate. Unfortunately, Yi Xian had too many troubles. If Shen Gate accepted him, they would be forcefully dragged into these troubles. Although Shen Gate wasn't afraid, they didn't want to fall out with the Realm Protection Alliance for Yi Xian. This wasn't in line with Shen Gate's interests. However, it was still a pity because Yi Xian was too monstrous. Mu Xiaoling sighed softly and then sped up. Not long later, she and Yi Ling disappeared from the scene. Realm Protection Alliance. There were only Mo Xiao and Supreme Lord Lu in the hall. The two of them didn't speak and the atmosphere was heavy. After a moment, Supreme Lord Lu suddenly said, "You have been tricked by him." Mo Xiao looked at Supreme Lord Lu. Supreme Lord Lu said calmly, "If that person is really Firmament Sword Master, you would have died by challenging him." Mo Xiao frowned. "If it isn't Firmament Sword Master, then who is it? You have to know that that person has no aura. Even if he is standing in front of me, I can't feel his existence." Supreme Lord Lu said coldly, "No matter who he is, since he dares to go against my Realm Protection Alliance, he isn't an ordinary person." As he said that, he looked at Mo Xiao. "Let's go. I will go with you and see who this person is." After saying that, the two of them disappeared from the hall. Not long after, High Lord Lu and Mo Xiao arrived in front of a thatched hut in a mountain range. Supremacy Lu glanced at the thatched cottage and cupped his fists. "How should I address you?" There was no movement in the thatched hut. Lord Lu narrowed his eyes. "Do you look down on me so much?" There was still no movement in the thatched hut. Lord Lu's face turned cold. With a wave of his right hand, a powerful pressure instantly swept towards the thatched cottage. Boom. The straw hut collapsed and the inside was empty. Lord Lu and Mo Xiao were instantly stunned when they saw this scene. No one. The two of them looked at each other and Lu Xun said in a deep voice, "Let's go to the Divine Fortune-Telling Sect and check." Mo Xiao said in a low voice, "I might have to pay a price." High Lord Lu shook his head. "I don't care anymore. The Pine Prefecture's quintessence heart is about to emerge into the world. We absolutely can't allow that kid Yi Xian to spoil our plans during this period of time." Mo Xiao nodded. "Understood. The heart of origin. To the Realm Defense Alliance, this was undoubtedly the most important thing." Soon Mo Xiao turned around and left. Lu Xun glanced at the surroundings before he left as well. After an unknown period of time, Supreme Lord Lu appeared once more, but the place was still empty. Lu Xun frowned when he saw this. "Did I sense wrongly?" As he spoke, he shook his head and turned around to leave. About an hour later, a figure suddenly appeared at the spot where Lu Xun Lord was originally standing. This person was Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, "That was close." Just now, Lu Xun had obviously noticed something. However, he wasn't sure himself. Although he didn't discover anything in the end, Yi Xian was still shocked. If he was discovered, he would definitely die. Because his intuition told him that with his current strength, even if he activated the World Prison Pagoda, he might not be able to kill Lu Xun. Lu Xun was obviously an expert above the true Imperial Law realm. In the future, he had to be more cautious when facing such an expert. After a while, Yi Xian turned around and left. He ran towards the depths of the mountain range and soon entered the vast mountains. Around half an hour later, Yi Xian found a dense forest. The forest was very dense and every tree was at least tens of feet tall. Even sunlight could not penetrate through. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and a small earth character quietly condensed between his brows. Dao Law. Condensing a Dao Law sword. He didn't know what the hell this Dao Law sword was, but he knew that since the mysterious woman had asked him to do this, she must have her reasons. Under Yi Xian's control, the Dao Law of Earth suddenly flew out from between his brows and floated in front of him. When this Dao Law appeared, the surrounding ground began to tremble. At the same time, endless power of the Earth gathered towards the Earth Law. After a while, after absorbing the endless power of the Earth Law became brighter. The Earth Law protected the Earth and endured the trampling of all things. If it was condensed into a sword, it would naturally be the Earth Sword. Gradually, Yi Xian began to sweat profusely and his body was trembling. This was because there was too much power of the Earth. It was so much that he couldn't control it. Yi Xian gritted his teeth. Condense. As soon as he said that, the Dao Law began to tremble violently. Then, under the influx of the power of the Earth, it gradually began to change shape. Around half an hour later, the tip of the sword appeared. At the sight of this, Yi Xian was ecstatic. This Dao Law could actually condense into a sword. At that moment, the Dao Law suddenly trembled violently. Boom. Endless power of the Earth shook in all directions and Yi Xian was instantly sent flying hundreds of feet away. In the surroundings, the dense forest had already been flattened. Yi Xian lay on the ground and just lay there. After an unknown period of time he slowly got up. Blood flowed continuously from the corner of his mouth. Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled bitterly. As expected, it's not that simple. As he said that, he sat down cross-legged and began to recuperate. Around an hour later Yi Xian continued. Judging from the power just now, if he really succeeded in condensing Haoran Gaia, it would definitely be very terrifying. At the very least, it wouldn't be any weaker than a heaven-level superior grade sword. Moreover, with the support of the Earth, its power would definitely surpass a heaven-level superior grade sword. He had to condense it. Yi Xian continued. However, it wasn't that smooth as he failed a few times. The most successful time was condensing the body of the sword. Unfortunately, this was far from enough. Continue. To Yi Xian, failure wasn't scary. What was scary was giving up. He wouldn't give up until the very last moment. Yi Xian condensed once again. Just like that, 2 days later, Yi Xian gradually began to understand some things. He couldn't condense it by force. If he condensed it by force, the power of the Earth would instinctively resist. Not only the power of the Earth, but even the law of Earth would instinctively resist. Communicate. He communicated with the law of Earth and had it cooperate with him to condense. If the law of Earth cooperated, the power of the Earth would cooperate. At first, it wasn't easy to communicate with it because the law of Earth was a bit cold and didn't pay much attention to him. In the end, Yi Xian took out the prison pagoda. Thus, the law of Earth started to cooperate. Clearly, it was giving face to the prison pagoda. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. In front of him, the law of Earth rotated violently. Countless amounts of Earth power gathered towards it. Gradually, the tip of a sword appeared. Seeing this, Yi Xian was overjoyed. He continued to urge the law of Earth. Soon, the body of the sword also appeared. The moment the body of the sword appeared, Yi Xian didn't relax. Instead, he became even more nervous. This was because he had failed countless times because he had condensed the sword hilt. Yi Xian was fully focused. More and more Earth power gathered towards the law of Earth. Gradually, the sword hilt began to appear. Half an hour later, whong. The sound of a sword suddenly rang through the sky. Success. Yi Xian lay limply on the ground. Not far away from him, a khaki-colored sword floated. The sword was 3 feet long and 2 fingers wide. It emitted a faint khaki-colored light. A moment later, Yi Xian stood up. He walked in front of the sword and grabbed its hilt. Boom. In an instant, a powerful force suddenly surged out from the sword, and the ground around him instantly cracked. The might of heaven and earth. This was the true might of heaven and earth. More accurately, it was the might of earth. When he sensed the power within the sword, Yi Xian was slightly excited. This sword was much stronger than his heaven-grade sword. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly slashed forward with the sword. At the tip of the sword, an earth-shattering power of the earth poured out along with his sword chi. Wherever the sword chi and the power of the earth passed, the ground would crack. Moreover, the sword chi and the power of the earth had swept out for over 1,000 feet. A moment later, a huge, bottomless ravine that was over 30 meters wide appeared in front of Yi Xian. The power of one sword was so terrifying. Yi Xian was a little excited. If he added the Space Dao Law to protect the sword Qi and earth power of this sword, it was very likely that this sword could hurt a true Imperial Dharma Realm expert. Simply put, he now had the ability to go head-on with a true Imperial Dharma Realm expert. The only drawback was that the Haoran Gaia consumed too much energy. With his current strength he could only activate it twice a day. If he used it too much he would definitely be exhausted to death. Yi Xian put away his sword. The word void suddenly appeared between his brows. Space Dao Law. The power of this Space Dao Law was obviously stronger than that of the Grand Dao Law. Moreover, the Space Dao Law involved more levels. What would happen if he condensed the Space Sword? Space Sword. Yi Xian was a little excited. He quickly sat down cross-legged. Soon the Space Dao Law between his brows flashed out. Soon the space around him trembled violently. Space trembled. Yi Xian was shocked. The curvature of the space trembling was a little too big. After hesitating for a moment, he decided to continue trying. Soon as he forcefully condensed it, the surrounding space started to distort. Streaks of powerful spatial energy rippled out from the surrounding space. After an unknown period of time, the surrounding space trembled violently and a sword tip quietly condensed. P.S. Sorry, I've been updating twice recently. I sincerely apologize. Today my dad underwent a second surgery to close the wound. I hope there won't be any problems this time. Chapter 275. The tip of the sword was transparent like the color of water. Evidently, it was condensed from spatial power. Sensing this, Yi Xian was overjoyed. He hurriedly activated the Space Dao, hoping to condense the sword. At that moment, the space around him suddenly shook violently. Boom. A powerful force instantly sent Yi Xian flying. He flew hundreds of meters away. Bang. Yi Xian crashed onto the ground, causing it to crack. On the ground, Yi Xian could not help but wail. Bang. It was too painful. At that moment, he felt as if all the muscles in his body were being torn apart. It was caused by spatial power, and it had a powerful tearing ability. If not for the protection of the Space Dao, he would have been shattered by this spatial power. I can't condense it for now. That was what Yi Xian was thinking. This spatial power was too powerful, and he could not control it at the moment. He had to reach the magic governing realm to truly control the spatial power. At that time he could condense the sword of space with the Space Dao. Although it was a pity, Yi Xian was satisfied as he had already condensed the Haoran Gaia. With the Haoran Gaia he could now barely resist a true defensive realm expert. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian began to heal his injuries. 2 hours later, the wounds on his body had completely healed. After recovering, Yi Xian did not leave. Instead, he began to study sword kinesis flight. He, who had already reached the Sword Emperor level, could actually use sword kinesis flight. Back in the country of Jiang, the Sword Emperor who had come to cause trouble for him had used sword kinesis flight. Unfortunately, he had been killed by the mysterious woman with a single strike. Sword kinesis flight. This had been his dream from the very beginning. Sword kinesis flight between heaven and earth, and he could see thousands of mountains and rivers. Thinking of this, Yi Xian felt a little excited. Sword kinesis flight. Under Yi Xian's instructions, the heaven's thunder sword floated in front of him, and he leaped onto it. The sword sank slightly, but it still lifted him up. Just like that, the heaven's thunder sword slowly moved forward under his control. It was fine at first, but the problem was that it couldn't go fast enough. Not only could it not go fast enough, but it couldn't go too high either. Otherwise, the sword would become extremely unstable. Just like that, Yi Xian pondered for nearly an entire day, but his sword still couldn't move fast enough. Not only could it not move fast, the sword could only reach 2 zhang above the ground. Any higher and it wouldn't be able to withstand it. At this moment, Yi Xian realized that the imperial sword technique wasn't that simple. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, deep in thought. If the mysterious woman was still here, then all the problems he encountered could be solved, but now the mysterious woman was not here. I can't build a car behind closed doors. He was not a peerless genius, and it was impossible for him to understand everything for no reason. He had to learn. Pale Sword Sect. Yi Xian thought of this sect, the biggest sect in the Azure world. His current understanding and learning of the Sword Dao all came from the mysterious woman. There was no need to doubt the mysterious woman's strength, but now that she was not here, it meant that he could not obtain new knowledge of the Sword Dao. At this time, if he built a car behind closed doors and blindly pondered, it might produce the opposite of the desired result. It was better to learn from the strengths of others and see more outstanding swordsmen. To the Pale Sword Sect. After Yi Xian made up his mind, he immediately set off. The Pale Sword Sect was a famous faction in the Azure world, so Yi Xian easily found the specific location of the Pale Sword Sect. The Pale Sword Sect was located on a sword mountain in the southern part of the Divine Central Continent. The reason it was called Sword Mountain was because the mountain was like a sharp sword hanging upside down in the air, piercing the heavens. Rumor had it that this sword mountain, which was thousands of zhang tall, had been forcibly carved out by the Azure World Sword Master. 2 days later, Yi Xian arrived at Sword Mountain. At this time he had slightly disguised his appearance. He had made a blood-red birthmark the size of a palm on his face, making him look extremely ugly. In addition, he had also used chaotic energy to conceal his Sword Emperor and true 10,000 Dharma Realm aura. The current him was a Sword Master and a Divine Unity Realm cultivator. But there was no other way. If he did not disguise himself, the Realm Protection Alliance would be able to find him in a matter of minutes. One had to know that in order to capture him, the Realm Protection Alliance had released his portrait throughout the entire Azure world. At the foot of Sword Mountain, Yi Xian raised his head to look at the peak. Above him was the Pale Sword Sect. Before he came, he had done some research. The Pale Sword Sect would recruit outer disciples every year, but now was not the time to do so. Apart from this, there was another way to enter the Pale Sword Sect, and that was to recommend oneself and pass the trials. The Pale Sword Sect had 3 trials at the foot of the mountain. As long as one passed these 3 trials, he would be able to enter the Pale Sword Sect. Yi Xian came to the first trial. There was an old man lying there. The old man had his legs crossed and his eyes were slightly closed. There was a lecherous smile on his face. It was obvious that he was dreaming of something. Yi Xian cupped his fists towards the old man. "Senior, I want to pass the trials." No response. Yi Xian said again, "Senior, I want to pass the trials." This time his voice was louder. Still no response. Yi Xian frowned. He suddenly stepped forward and grabbed the old man, shouting angrily, "I want to pass the trials." The old man opened his eyes. He was a little stunned. A moment later he shouted angrily, "Who are you?" Yi Xian let go of the old man and said calmly, "And Yi, I am here to pass the trials." The old man said angrily, "Pass what trials?" "The old man declares that you fail. Hurry up and scram." Yi Xian was expressionless. "Old man, it's not that I'm boasting, but not taking me in is the greatest loss your Pale Sword Sect has suffered in the past 1,000 years. The old man said angrily, "Stop bullshitting. With someone like you still think it's 1,000 years of loss? According to the old man, if I take you in, I'm afraid you will become the scourge of my Pale Sword Sect for 1,000 years. Yi Xian took out a true great sword. He pointed it at the old man. "Old man, fight me one-on-one." One-on-one. The old man was stunned. You wanted to fight him one-on-one? The old man sized up Yi Xian. "Is there something wrong with your head?" Yi Xian was expressionless. "I'll give you 3 strikes. Quick, draw your sword." The old man glanced coldly at Yi Xian. "Young man, you really don't know the immensity of the heavens and the earth. Never mind, let this old man teach you how to be a person." As he spoke, he waved his right hand, and an expanse of sword light shot out violently. The myriad Dharma realm. Moreover, it was a sword master. Meanwhile, Yi Xian charged forward swiftly with his sword in hand, and then he slashed down. The expanse of sword light was directly torn apart. The old man was stunned, and then he said with astonishment, "Sword master? You're actually a sword master?" Yi Xian put his sword away and said indifferently, "I'm the real deal." The old man's expression instantly became slightly unsightly when he heard this. Sword master. Even if such a young sword master was placed in the Pale Sword Sect, he could be considered as a top-rate disciple. He really was a genius. The old man went silent for a moment before he said, "Wait a moment." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. On the spot, Yi Xian put his sword away and closed his eyes in meditation. Arrogant? He was naturally being arrogant intentionally. Because according to normal circumstances he had to first become an outer court disciple, then an inner court disciple and finally an elite disciple. And only an elite disciple could come into contact with the core of the Pale Sword Sect. This was truly too slow and he didn't have that much time. He had to be more high profile and directly draw the attention of the Pale Sword Sect's higher-ups. In next to no time, the old man and a middle-aged man arrived before him. The middle-aged man sized up Yi Xian. "What's your name?" Yi Xian said, "And Yi." The middle-aged man nodded lightly. "Where are you from?" Yi Xian said in a low voice, "An independent cultivator." The middle-aged man asked, "Why do you want to join the Pale Sword Sect?" Yi Xian's expression was calm. After attaining the Sword Master realm, it's truly difficult to break through once more by just relying on myself. So I want to join the Pale Sword sect, and I hope to learn new things in the Blue Sword sect so that I can break through once more in the Sword Dao. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian for a long time before he said, "You can become an inner court disciple." Inner court disciple? Yi Xian shook his head. "I want to become an elite disciple." The middle-aged man smiled. "Why?" Yi Xian said, "Becoming an elite disciple allows one to learn more and obtain more resources." The middle-aged man shook his head lightly. "Your way of thinking is correct. However, if you want to become an elite disciple, then it depends on if any of the martial uncles are willing to accept you. If they aren't willing, then you can only become an inner court disciple. Understand?" Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and then he said, "I'm so outstanding so they ought to accept me, right?" The middle-aged man laughed heartily. "Your skin is really thick." Yi Xian said seriously, "I'm an honest person and I like to speak the truth." The middle-aged man shook his head. "Come with me. Since you're already a sword master, then you're qualified to see the martial uncles." Finished speaking, he turned and left. Yi Xian was about to follow, but as if he thought of something, he suddenly flicked his finger, and a spatial ring fell in front of the old man. "Just now, I've offended you." Finished speaking, he hurriedly followed the middle-aged man. Behind him, the old man glanced at the spatial ring and was instantly stunned. Inside the spatial ring, there were actually millions of top-grade spirit stones. Millions of top-grade spirit stones. To him, this was undoubtedly not a small amount of wealth. A moment later, the old man put away the spatial ring and said with a smile, "Interesting little fellow." Under the middle-aged man's lead, Yi Xian arrived at the top of the mountain. There was only a single palace at the top of the mountain, and he didn't see anyone along the way, not even a single Pale Sword sect disciple. As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the middle-aged man suddenly smiled. "They're all cultivating in the Mausoleum of Swords, so it's very rare to see them." Yi Xian nodded and then he asked, "How many swordsmen are there in the Pale Sword sect?" The middle-aged man smiled. "About 150, but there are 6 sword immortals, 26 sword emperors, 62 sword masters, and the rest are at least great swordsmen. Of course, only some who have just joined aren't. However, anyone who's able to join the Pale Sword sect has great talent and potential, so becoming a great swordsman and sword master is only a matter of time." Yi Xian's scalp went numb when he heard that. 6 sword immortals, 26 sword emperors, 62 sword masters. What a fucking terrifying lineup. As expected of one of the top powers in the Central Divine Continent. The Realm Defense Alliance. At that moment, Yi Xian suddenly thought of the Realm Defense Alliance. If the Pale Sword sect was this terrifying, then just how terrifying was the Realm Defense Alliance's true strength? At that moment, the two of them entered the main hall. The main hall was empty. On each side of the main hall there were 3 empty chairs. The middle-aged man bowed slightly to the center of the main hall. "Martial uncles, please come out and meet me. There's a young man who wants to become a true disciple." After a moment of silence, an old man with white hair and a beard suddenly appeared on the first seat on the left. The old man sized up Yi Xian then shook his head. "Too bad." After saying that, he immediately disappeared. Yi Xian. At that moment, a white-robed middle-aged man suddenly appeared on the first seat on the right. The middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian, then disappeared without saying a word. Just like that, after a while, only the last seat on the left remained empty, and the people who had appeared before all shook their heads. To put it simply, they didn't like him. Yi Xian's face was as gloomy as water. He had underestimated the Pale Sword sect. The Pale Sword sect didn't like ordinary sword masters at all. Moreover, they were only at the Divine Unity realm. The problem was that he couldn't return to the Myriad Dharma realm or Sword Emperor, because if he did that, it would definitely arouse suspicion. At that moment, a woman suddenly appeared on the last seat. The woman glanced at Yi Xian, her face expressionless. "A bit too bad, but barely. My Cloudsword Mountain just so happens to be lacking an errand boy. Come with me." "Errand boy." Yi Xian. Chapter 276. After saying that, the woman turned around and disappeared. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Doing odd jobs? Asking a dignified sword emperor to do odd jobs? That was too much. At this moment, the middle-aged man in front of Yi Xian suddenly said, "And Yi, are you willing to go to Cloudsword Peak?" Yi Xian was slightly hesitant. "He came here to study. To do odd jobs, study my ass." As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the middle-aged man said with a smile, Actually, even though you'll be doing odd jobs at Cloud's Word Peak in name, if you're willing, you can still learn many things on the mountain. If you're unwilling, you can only start as an inner court disciple. If you show outstanding performance in the future, you'll have a chance to become an elite disciple. Yi Xian thought about it and said, I'll go. Starting as an inner court disciple was too slow. But that woman was a sword immortal. Staying by the side of such a person would definitely allow him to learn many things. The middle-aged man nodded slightly, then report to Cloud's Word Peak. Remember, senior sister Yu Qi's character is a bit strange. Actually, she's not very strange. She's a pretty good person. Quickly report to Cloud's Word Peak. After saying that, he turned around and disappeared. On the spot, Yi Xian's face was filled with black lines. Needless to say, there was probably something strange about this Cloud's Word Peak. After hesitating for a moment, he finally decided to go to Cloud's Word Peak because he couldn't leave now since he was already here. Before coming here, Yi Xian had already investigated Pale Sword Sect. Pale Sword Sect had 7 main peaks, namely Pale Sword Peak, Mysterious Sword Peak, Cloud's Word Peak, 100 Herb Peak, Imperial Brush Peak, Formation Peak, and Weapon Forging Peak. Previously, he wasn't familiar with these 7 peak masters, but after seeing 6 of them just now, he realized that every peak master was a sword immortal. Pale Mountain's 7 sword immortals. The strength of Pale Sword Sect was much stronger than he'd imagined. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian turned around and left the main hall for Cloud's Word Peak. Every peak had a teleportation platform. The peak that Yi Xian was on also had one. He found the teleportation platform and used the teleportation formation to arrive at the Cloud Sword Peak. After arriving at the Cloud's Word Peak, he finally understood why it was called the Cloud's Word Peak. That was because the entire mountain was extremely tall, and the peak was surrounded by clouds and mist, making it look like a paradise. The scenery was great. Yi Xian's mood was no longer that gloomy. He continued forward, and before long, he arrived in front of a magnificent palace. He stood at the entrance of the palace and bowed slightly. Master Yu Jr. and Yi is here to report. There was no response from within the hall. Yi Xian called again, but there was still no response. There should be no one here. Yi Xian pushed open the door to the main hall. The moment he pushed open the door, Yi Xian was stunned. The hall in front of him was filled with all kinds of bamboo scrolls. Apart from the bamboo scrolls, there were also countless messy strips of cloth. These strips of cloth were all written with words. Upon closer inspection, Yi Xian discovered that these strips of cloth were written with some insights. Some insights on sword skills and swordsmanship. Yi Xian casually picked up a strip of cloth beside him. On it was written, "This sword skill is really bad. It takes too long to charge. If the enemy is fast enough before the sword skill is unleashed, the enemy would already be dead. I should focus on revising a few parts." Next to the white cloth there was a scroll. This scroll turned out to be an upper earth rank sword skill, 4-season sword technique. Yi Xian opened the scroll and glanced at it. Gradually Yi Xian's expression turned solemn, because he discovered that if he were to revise it according to Yu Qi's annotations, the 4-season sword technique would instantly undergo a qualitative transformation. It could be said that after the revision, the 4-season sword technique could at least reach the pseudo-heaven rank. What a monster. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. Because before this, apart from the mysterious woman, he had not seen any other powerful swordsman. Before this, he had looked down on the firmament world swordsman. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Cultivation, or rather, he himself was a little arrogant. He was arrogant enough to think that he was the best in the firmament world. At this moment, he finally understood what it meant by there would always be someone better than you. People should always maintain a humble heart, because there will always be people who are more powerful than you. Learn from others' strengths. Only by constantly learning could one improve continuously. There were many cabinets around the hall. Obviously, these cabinets were used to store these scrolls. Yi Xian began to organize them. In the process, he would carefully look at the insights and sword skills that Yu Qi had left behind, as well as some swordsmanship cultivation methods. However, he only looked at them and did not learn them because these sword skills were not as good as his one sword determines life and death, one sword determines soul, and his self-created Tenjiang kill. Even so, he still carefully looked at them and studied them. He learned the ability to find flaws in sword skills. Not only that, through continuous study and research, he found many flaws in sword skills. In the future, if someone used these sword skills against him, he could easily break them. However, this work was very troublesome, because many of the scrolls were not in the same place as Yu Qi's insights and comments. He needed to slowly find them, and only after he found them could he put them in the same box. Although it was troublesome, Yi Xian enjoyed it because he could learn a lot. Time passed bit by bit until the next night. Yi Xian was still organizing, and he had already organized at least 1/5 of the hall. It was too messy, too messy. Sometimes Yi Xian was speechless. When Yu Qi was studying these things, he must have randomly thrown them away, or else it would not be so messy. During this time, Yu Qi did not come back and no one knew where he went. The next morning Yi Xian was really tired. So he laid on the ground and started to rest. At this moment, the door of the hall suddenly opened and a woman walked in. The woman wore a long black dress, and on the long dress, there were several white jade flowers. From the appearance, she was about 20 years old, with delicate facial features and long hair that flowed over her shoulders. There were some white strands in her long hair. On her feet, she wore a pair of straw sandals, which was very simple. The person who came was the peak master of the clouds, word peak, Yu Qi. When she saw Yi Xian sleeping, Yu Qi immediately frowned. However, when she saw the books on the cabinets around her, she was slightly taken aback. Then she glanced at the surroundings. Although the surroundings still looked a little messy, it was much better than before. Moreover, there was an extra path in the middle. Yu Qi pondered for a moment, then looked at Yi Xian. She did not speak, and with a point of her finger, a storage ring fell in front of Yi Xian. Then she walked towards the depths of the hall, and in the hall, there was a cabinet where she rested. At noon Yi Xian woke up. He looked at the storage ring in front of him, and there were 100,000 top-grade spiritual stones in the ring. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. It was undoubtedly very, very little for him, but for an ordinary disciple, it was actually quite a lot. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian put away the storage ring and continued to organize. Through organizing and studying, he gradually learned some principles and experience, the principles of finding flaws, and the experience of how to modify sword skills. At this moment he suddenly realized that the Tenjiang kill that he had created was somewhat inadequate. However, he did not feel the same way about the single sword strike to determine life and death and single sword strike to determine soul. These two sword skills could not be considered as sword skills, but a kind of sword belief. When he realized that the Tenjiang kill had some shortcomings, Yi Xian was a little overjoyed because discovering his own shortcomings was equivalent to improving himself. People were not afraid of having shortcomings, but they were afraid of not knowing their own shortcomings. 2 days later. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. When he was organizing a scroll, Yi Xian was suddenly stunned. Heaven rank sword skill. During this period of time he'd organized the heaven rank sword techniques. However, this heaven rank sword technique was slightly different. Because it was a heaven rank sword technique related to space void flash. If this sword technique was cultivated to the extreme, it could make use of space to make one sword chi appear in front of the enemy in an instant, achieving an unexpected effect. In order to learn this sword technique, one must have reached the pinnacle of the use of space. At the very least, one must have reached the 10,000 Dharma realm. On the other hand, Yi Xian obviously fulfilled these conditions. Moreover, he possessed the spatial Dao law, and the might of this sword technique would definitely multiply with the spatial Dao law. He could learn. Yi Xian was overjoyed. As if he had thought of something, he hurriedly looked for Yu Qi's annotation. It took him almost an hour to find it. On the white cloth, creativity is okay, but the consumption is huge. If you manage to cultivate this sword skill, remember not to forcefully use your sword chi to pierce through space when you use it. You should use space as a support and let the power of space form a pushing force. This way the sword speed of this sword skill can be multiplied. This sword skill consumes a huge amount of energy, but you can adjust the meridians that circulate. After a short while, Yi Xian put away the white cloth and sighed softly. I'm convinced. He was convinced. He truly admired Yu Qi because Yu Qi's annotation could be said to have improved this sword skill by at least a level. Cultivate. Yi Xian decisively chose to cultivate. After tidying up the surroundings, he left the main hall and went to the depths of the back mountain. There was a bamboo forest in the depths of the back mountain, and Yi Xian sat down cross-legged after entering the depths of the bamboo forest. He started to recall the instant space sword. The most difficult part of the instant space sword was that it required a very deep understanding of space, and he just happened to meet that requirement. Moreover, he had the space Dao law. With the space Dao law, it would be even easier for him to cultivate. Just like that, 4 hours later, Yi Xian, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, suddenly stood up. The sword in his hand suddenly disappeared. 100 feet away, a wisp of sword light suddenly flashed out of a space, and then a sword tip appeared in that space. There was only the tip of the sword, not the blade. Yi Xian felt slightly embarrassed. Obviously he had failed. Yi Xian didn't give up, and he continued trying over and over again. At noon the next day, the sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly vanished, and in the next moment, the bamboo forest around him was suddenly slashed apart. The void flash. At this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from the side. Yi Xian cursed inwardly. The owner of this voice was Yu Qi. Yi Xian turned around and saw Yu Qi standing not too far away from him. Yu Qi just stared at him and it caused Yi Xian's scalp to go numb. Suddenly he had an idea and hurriedly said, "Master Yu, no matter how I cultivated earlier, I couldn't get it right. In the end, after reading your annotation, I cultivated according to the method you said. I never expected that I would actually succeed." Yu Qi was slightly stunned. "My annotation?" Yi Xian nodded quickly, and then he took out a piece of white cloth and handed it to Yu Qi. "This is it." Yu Qi glanced at the white cloth and after a moment she nodded slightly. "It was my annotation, but, speaking of this," she looked at Yi Xian, "this sword skill can only be practiced by a true 10,000 Dharma realm expert, and you seem to be only at the Divine Unity realm." Yi Xian's expression froze. How to fool. This is a problem. P.S. Let me remind everyone there have been a lot of scammers recently, the kind of people who say that they have finished the book and that they can read it by spending money. Some readers have been fooled, everyone must be careful. And that reader found me through my QQ and even sent me a screenshot of the transfer. I have already transferred the money to him, mainly because I was touched. If I didn't really like it, I wouldn't have been fooled. Everyone must be careful. End of this chapter. Chapter 277. Yu Qi looked at Yi Xian with a calm expression, but Yi Xian felt an invisible pressure. Sword immortal. This is a sword immortal. Yi Xian pondered for a moment, then said, "Actually, I am at the true 10,000 Dharma realm." As he spoke, he released his true 10,000 Dharma realm aura. Yu Qi sized up Yi Xian. "Since you are at the true 10,000 Dharma realm, why do you hide your aura?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "I want to keep a low profile." Yu Qi shook her head. "No, when you came to my Blue Sword sect, you didn't keep a low profile. Moreover, you wanted to become a true disciple the moment you arrived. This proves that you don't want to keep a low profile at all." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. This wasn't easy to fool. Yu Qi suddenly said, "It's fine if you don't want to say it, stay here and don't leave. Later the sect's enforcers will come to find you, you can go talk to them." As she finished speaking, she turned and left. At this time Yi Xian hurriedly ran in front of Yu Qi, smiling bitterly. "Master Yu, I hid my realm because I had my own difficulties. It's not that I have evil intentions towards the Blue Sword sect. Moreover, with my ability, it's impossible for me to pose any threat to the Blue Sword sect. What do you think?" Yu Qi glanced at Yi Xian. "What difficulties?" Yi Xian hesitated, then said, "I'm being chased." Yu Qi looked straight at Yi Xian. "Why are you being chased?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Master Yu, is this important?" "Of course." Yu Qi said, "If you do something devoid of conscience and are being chased, then you deserve to die. But if you are being chased because you were bullied or because you met with injustice, then it's a different matter." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Of course it's the latter." Yu Qi asked again, "Who is chasing you?" Yi Xian said, "True 10,000 Dharma realm and experts above that." Yu Qi frowned. "Then why aren't you dead?" Yi Xian was speechless. Yu Qi sized up Yi Xian and said, "If what you said is true, then you should have died at least 100 times with your strength." Yi Xian laughed. "Maybe I'm lucky." Yu Qi shook his head. "Forget it. Everyone has their own secrets. Since you didn't do something that goes against the heavens and is being hunted down by others, and you're a disciple of my Blue Sword sect, then do your job well here." With that she turned around and left. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, "Master Yu." Yu Qi halted his steps. Yi Xian walked over to Yu Qi, hesitated for a moment and then said, "Actually, my real name is Yi Xian." When he said these words, even he himself was stunned because he didn't expect it. "Yi Xian?" Yu Qi nodded slightly. "Understood." With that she continued forward. On the spot Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly ran over to Yu Qi. He pointed to himself. "I am Yi Xian." Yu Qi frowned slightly. "I already know that your real name is Yi Xian. Is there a problem?" Yi Xian's throat rolled and then he said, "Master Yu, you've never heard of me?" Yu Qi's frown deepened. "Are you very famous?" Yi Xian was speechless. Yu Qi ignored him and walked straight into the distance, disappearing into the bamboo forest in a short while. On the spot, Yi Xian was stunned for a long time. In the end he shook his head and smiled. I was very honest. He finally knew why he'd confessed his true identity at the last moment. Conscience. Most of the time people could be shameless, but most of the time people couldn't be shameless. Shameless. This chapter isn't finished, please continue. He had to be right. Without thinking too much about it, Yi Xian continued to cultivate Void Flash. Because of the Space Dao law, his cultivation was getting smoother and smoother. If the instant space sword was paired with his chaotic chi, it would definitely be very, very terrifying when used for assassination. Now, he kind of wanted to assassinate an expert at the true defensive Dharma realm. Arrogance. At the thought of this, Yi Xian couldn't help but chuckle because he felt that he had indeed become a little arrogant. However, he liked this feeling. This kind of confidence. After the sky turned dark, Yi Xian returned to the hall, and he walked to the front of the inner hall. Master Yu, do you want to eat? No. This was Yu Qi's answer. Yi Xian nodded, and then he walked over to the side and took out a table. On the table was a table filled with dishes that he'd made with local ingredients in the dense forest. Fragrant. It wasn't ordinary fragrant. Right when Yi Xian was about to move his chopsticks, Yu Qi suddenly walked over. She glanced at the dishes on the table before looking at Yi Xian in the end, and she seemed to be waiting for something. How could Yi Xian not understand? He hurriedly stood up and passed the chopsticks to Yu Qi, and then he smiled. Master, you try this? Yu Qi nodded, took the chopsticks and then sat before the table. She glanced at the dishes on the table before she picked up a mushroom and placed it in her mouth. After a short moment, she blinked and nodded. Not bad. As soon as she finished speaking, she picked up a few more. Yi Xian was delighted when he saw this. Because forming a good relationship with Yu Qi would definitely be boundlessly beneficial to him. Meanwhile, Yu Qi suddenly looked at him. You eat as well. Yi Xian chuckled, and then he withdrew a pair of chopsticks and started eating. Just like that, the two of them ate one after another, and it wasn't long before all the dishes on the table had been swept clean. Obviously, Yu Qi hadn't eaten such delicious food for a long time. Yu Qi put down her chopsticks and stood up. As if she had thought of something, she glanced at Yi Xian. You'll be the one to cook from now on. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and walked into the inner hall. Yi Xian was speechless. After tidying up, Yi Xian continued to organize the sword skills and cultivation techniques in the inner hall. Although he had only been in the Tsang sword sect for a short time, Yi Xian had gained too much during this time. This also made him understand that cultivation couldn't be done behind closed doors. He had to constantly learn and learn from the strengths of others. Only in this way would he be able to improve himself. Besides tidying up the inner hall every day, he still had to do one more thing, and that was cook. Yu Qi was full of praise for his cooking every single time. In this regard, Yi Xian came to a conclusion that if he wanted to capture a woman's heart, he had to first capture her stomach. And Yi Xian's hard work was also fruitful, and that was to receive pointers from Yu Qi from time to time. It had to be said that Yu Qi's pointers really hit the nail on the head. Just like that, about half a month later, an old man suddenly came to the Cloudy Sword Peak. Outside the inner hall, the old man bowed slightly. Uncle Master Yu, under the orders of the sect master, has come to summon Uncle Master's true disciples to wait at the inherited sword platform. After a moment of silence, a voice came from the inner hall. Got it? The old man bowed again, then turned around and left. Inside the inner hall, Yu Qi walked out and glanced at Yi Xian, who was tidying up. There should be a mission for you to do at the inherited sword platform. As she spoke, she waved her hand and an upper-grade truth-grade sword fell in front of Yi Xian. I'll lend it to you for now. As she finished speaking, she turned around and entered the inner hall. Mission. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Yi Xian was stunned. There was a mission to do? After a moment he felt a little relieved. In the sect, under normal circumstances, there were some missions for the disciples to do. The purpose of doing so was naturally to train one's survival ability and combatability. If one kept practicing in the sect without any contact with the outside world, he would undoubtedly become a fool. After a moment, Yi Xian put away the sword in front of him and went to the inherited sword platform. The inherited sword platform was located on a lone mountain. The mountain was very high, only second to the Cloudy Sword Peak. At the top of the mountain there was a huge stone platform. On the stone platform there was a huge sword. The huge sword was more than 10 feet tall and 300 feet wide. It stood straight as if it was going to pierce through the sky. When Yi Xian arrived at the inherited sword platform, there were already two people there, a man and a woman. Both of them were not very old, in their 20s. The man wore a blue robe while the woman wore a water green dress. Both of them carried a sword case on their backs. Seeing Yi Xian, the two of them cupped their fists at Yi Xian as a greeting. Yi Xian hurriedly returned the greeting. The three of them waited quietly at the side, no one said a word. Yi Xian, however, felt a little bored. He walked to the man's side. "How should I address you, brother?" The man glanced at Yi Xian, then said, "Xianjian Peak by Liyun." Yi Xian's expression was very shocked. "So you are Bai Liyun from the Pale Sword sect?" Bai Liyun was stunned, then said, "You have heard of me?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Of course. To be honest, I have just entered the Pale Sword sect. Before coming to the Pale Sword sect, I have already heard of you, brother Bai Liyun. Who in the outside world does not know you, Bai Liyun?" Bai Liyun blinked his eyes. "I am very famous?" Yi Xian's expression was incomparably serious. "Very famous, who does not know that brother Bai Liyun is the future hope of our Pale Sword sect?" Bai Liyun hurriedly said, "This? Although there is a little bit of truth, a person who cultivates the sword should always maintain a low profile and humble heart." Yi Xian. At this time Bai Liyun approached Yi Xian and said, "And about that, what else did the outside world say about me?" Yi Xian was about to speak. At this time, there was suddenly a sword cry in the distant sky, and then, a woman suddenly flew over from the distant sky on a sword. The sword flew across the sky. The woman rode on the sword with an extremely graceful posture and steadily landed beside the inherited sword platform. After landing, the woman jumped off the sword, and with a hook of her jade-like fingers, the green sword directly transformed into a ray of sword light and entered between her eyebrows. The woman was extremely beautiful, especially her figure. It was extremely graceful and slender, causing people to be unable to help but want to hug her. "It's senior sister Lan Yu." By Yi Xian's side, Bai Liyun said, "Senior sister Lan Yu is extremely formidable. Supposedly, she'll be able to attain the Sword Emperor realm in a year at most." Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Brother Bai Liyun, who's more formidable between you and her?" Bai Liyun hesitated for a moment and then he said, "If she doesn't use a sword, then it's a 50-50 battle between us." Yi Xian couldn't help but fiercely despise this fellow in his heart. He's actually shameless to such an extent. Meanwhile, an old man suddenly appeared on the inherited sword platform, and he glanced at Yi Xian's group of four. "After all of you leave this place, you must listen to senior sister Lan Yu's orders and cooperate well with her to complete this assignment. You'll be richly rewarded if the assignment is completed, and you'll definitely be punished if you fail. Now let's go." As soon as the old man finished speaking, Lan Yu directly flew up into the sky on her sword. On the other hand, the woman by Yi Xian's side followed closely behind her, and so did Bai Liyun. The three of them quickly vanished into the clouds. On the other hand, there was no movement from Yi Xian. The old man gazed at Yi Xian. "Do you have a problem?" Yi Xian's face darkened. "I have a huge fucking problem. I don't fucking know how to control a sword." End of this chapter. Chapter 278. Sword Control. A dignified sword emperor actually doesn't know how to control a sword. Even Yi Xian himself felt that it was quite shameful. The greatest humiliation of his life. The old man frowned slightly when he saw Yi Xian remain silent. "Why aren't you answering?" Yi Xian smiled. Elder, I don't know how to control a sword." The old man was slightly stunned. "You don't know how to control a sword?" Yi Xian nodded. The old man frowned. "Are you joking?" Yi Xian hurriedly said, "I've only entered the sword sect for less than half a month, and my master hasn't taught me how to control a sword." "Martial Uncle Yu." The old man fell silent for a moment before he spoke softly, "Martial Uncle Yu?" When he spoke up to this point, he glanced at Yi Xian. "You don't know how to control a sword. That's a problem." Right at this moment, a ray of light shot down from the sky and it landed on the ground. Was Bai Liyun. Bai Liyun walked over to Yi Xian and was slightly puzzled. "Brother Yi, why didn't you come with me?" Yi Xian was speechless. The old man spoke abruptly. "He hasn't learned how to control a sword." Bai Liyun was stunned, and then he looked at Yi Xian and smiled. It's fine. It isn't difficult to control a sword. It wouldn't be too late for Brother Yi to learn it in the future. As for now, if Brother Yi doesn't mind, you can control a sword with me." Yi Xian nodded. "Then I'll trouble Brother Bailey to give me a ride." Bai Liyun roared with laughter. "Don't mention it." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand and a sword hovered in midair. He leaped up and descended firmly onto the blade of the sword, and then he looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian leaped up as well and descended behind Bailey Yun. In next to no time his sword shot into the sky and into the clouds. His heartbeat sped up. At this moment Yi Xian felt his heartbeat speed up, and even his breathing quickened. It didn't take long for the sword to charge into the sky. At this moment the entire firmament sword sect below seemed tiny. Not long after the two of them caught up to Lan Yu. Lan Yu stopped in the air, she glanced at Yi Xian and Bai Liyun. Follow? As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and transformed into a ray of sword light that vanished into the horizon. His speed was extremely fast. On the other hand, the other woman seemed to be slightly unconvinced. She immediately sped up and instantly disappeared into the horizon. In front of Yi Xian, Bailey Yun exclaimed in admiration. This senior sister Lan Yu is amazing. Her sword maneuvering speed far surpasses ours. But it can't be helped. The sword in senior sister Lan Yu's hand is at the peak of the true rank, and it can be considered a half-step heavenly rank sword. Yi Xian asked, is this speed related to the sword? Bailey Yun nodded, of course. The quality of the sword determines how much power it can withstand. If the sword isn't good enough, then the sword maneuvering speed will drop greatly. Besides that, the speed of the sword maneuvering speed is also related to the person's strength. Your master will tell you all of this in the future. Yi Xian nodded. Needless to say, after coming out this time, he'd learned too many things. The mysterious woman's sword Dao was too high-end. It was so high that it wasn't suitable for him now. What he had to do now was not to bite off more than he could chew. His path had to be walked step by step. Roughly an hour later, the four of them arrived in the sky above a small island. Under Lan Yu's lead, the four of them descended at the edge of the island. After they landed, Lan Yu glanced at Yi Xian's group of three. This island is called Myriad Island, and it's a product of our firmament sword sect. There are abundant spirit ores and treasures of heaven and earth on and around this island. However, just a day ago all the people that were guarding this place suddenly disappeared. This time the objective of our trip here is to investigate this matter clearly. Yi Xian suddenly asked, what realm are the people guarding this place at? This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Lan Yu glanced at Yi Xian. There are 3 at the law-defending realm and 6 at the law-defending realm. Hearing this, Yi Xian suddenly frowned. If the other party can make these 9 people disappear without a trace, this proves that the other party is most likely at the true law-defending realm, or that they have a large number of people. I think that with just the 4 of us, we should leave immediately and start somewhere else instead of coming to this island so recklessly. Hearing this, Lan Yu frowned. What, are you afraid? Yi Xian was somewhat speechless. Senior sister Lan, this isn't fear, this is planning before taking action. As he said that, he looked around. Haven't you guys noticed? After we entered this island, there was no movement at all. Apart from that, the surrounding water is also extremely calm. There's clearly wind, but it's so calm. Lan Yu suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian. If you're afraid, then leave. Yi Xian almost slapped this woman away. Was there something wrong with her head? At this moment, Bailey Yun suddenly came out to be a peacemaker. Senior sister Lan Yu, brother Yi, we're all on the same side, let's not harm each other. Moreover, we're all here for the same mission, and that is to clearly investigate who exactly is it that is secretly making a move against our Blue Sword sect. What do all of you think? Lan Yu coldly looked at Yi Xian. Do you think that I don't know what you're talking about? However, we swordsmen should move forward bravely, face everything directly and not run away. Only by doing this, can our swords be successful. Yi Xian shook his head, pedantic. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Lan Yu's expression instantly changed. She suddenly pulled out her sword and pointed it at Yi Xian. What did you say? Say it one more time. Yi Xian spoke indifferently. I said you're stupid. Presumptuous. Lan Yu charged forward swiftly with her sword in hand, and a wave of sword light slashed down diagonally, and it instantly arrived above Yi Xian's head. It was swift like a bolt of lightning. However, at the moment this sword descended, Yi Xian had already retreated over 30 m away. Her sword strike missed. Lan Yu was stunned, and then she sized up Yi Xian and sneered, You have some ability. As soon as she finished speaking, she was about to attack once more when Bailey Yun hurriedly stood in front of her. Senior sister Lan Yu, don't be rash. If you injure one of our own because of some small matter, then you'll surely be expelled from the sect when we return. Expelled from the sect. Lan Yu frowned. Private battles were strictly prohibited in the Pale Sword sect. If there was really a conflict, then it could be mediated by the sect elders, and if it still didn't work, then they could apply for a life and death challenge. However, the Pale Sword sect hadn't had a life-and-death duel in almost 100 years. If a sect was at odds with each other, then it would be filled with a foul atmosphere. Thus, if anyone was unreasonable or intentionally caused trouble, then the Pale Sword sect would directly expel them from the sect. Lan Yu fell silent for a moment before she glanced coldly at Yi Xian, and then she sheathed her sword before turning around and walking towards the depths of the island. The other woman was called Gu Yu, and she glanced at Yi Xian before turning around and following her. Bailey Yun walked over to Yi Xian and patted Yi Xian on the shoulder. Brethren, this senior sister Lan Yu has a bad temper, so don't bother with her. Moreover, this senior sister Lan Yu is from the Shenzhen Peak, and the Shenzhen Peak isn't one to be trifled with. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Actually, I'm not one to be trifled with, ha. Bailey Yun laughed. Brethren, if you're a difficult person to get along with, then you won't be able to get along with anyone during this period of time. Let's go, let's hurry up and catch up. No matter what kind of conflicts there are within the sect, if we don't help our enemies when we encounter them, then that's a huge taboo. With that, he pulled Yi Xian and ran towards the depths of the island. Along the way, Yi Xian's expression was rather solemn, because his intuition told him that this damned place was actually not simple. Not long later, the few of them arrived in front of a black palace. This chapter is not over, please turn the page. Lan Yu and the others instantly frowned. Yi Xian asked, "What's wrong?" Bailey Yun said in a deep voice, "Before this, there was no palace here. To be precise, a day ago there was no palace here." No palace. Yi Xian raised his head to look at the black palace. The palace's door was open, but he couldn't see inside. Let's go. Lan Yu was about to enter when Yi Xian shook his head. Don't go in there. Lan Yu flared up with rage when she heard Yi Xian, and she pointed angrily at Yi Xian. You coward. You. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly waved his hand. All right. Just go in quickly. Lan Yu glanced coldly at Yi Xian, and her eyes didn't conceal the disdain in them at all. Ugly people always cause trouble and are cowardly. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and walked towards the black palace. This time, Gu Yu glanced at Yi Xian and didn't follow Lan Yu in. Bailey Yun hesitated for a moment and said, Junior sister Gu Yu and brother-in, should we follow them in? Yi Xian was just about to speak when a huge explosion suddenly resounded from within the black palace, and then a beautiful figure flashed out from within it. Was Lan Yu. At this moment her entire body was covered in injuries. Especially her left shoulder, it had split open, and her entire arm had almost fallen off. Moreover, a hideous rotting figure was following behind Lan Yu. The rotting figure was extremely swift, and its fist had arrived behind Lan Yu's head as soon as she left the palace. If that fist were to land on her head, then it would definitely shatter her into pieces. Lan Yu didn't dare to continue running, and she immediately turned around and slashed with her sword. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then Lan Yu was instantly blasted over 30 m away. However, she hadn't even stopped when the rotting figure charged towards her once more. Meanwhile, Gu Yu and Bailey Yun who stood by Yi Xian's side suddenly drew their swords, and two rays of light slashed towards the rotting figure. The rotting figure raised its hand and smashed its fist forward. Bang! The two rays of light instantly exploded apart. Right at this moment, the ground in the surroundings suddenly wriggled, and it didn't take long for almost 20 rotting figures to crawl out from the ground. Seeing this scene, the expressions of Lan Yu and the others instantly changed. Yi Xian's face was expressionless, and he was just about to make a move when Lan Yu suddenly crushed a sound-transmitting talisman. The sound-transmitting talisman exploded, and a message soared into the sky. However, there was no response at all. Seeing this, Lan Yu's expression instantly became unsightly. This was a sound-transmitting talisman for help. Before they came here, experts from Pale Sword sect had been following them in secret. Just at this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from nearby. Are you asking him for help? Hearing this voice, Lan Yu and the others turned their heads and looked over. Not far away, a red-haired man was slowly walking over, and in the red-haired man's hand, there was a bloody head. This head belonged to the Blue Sword sect's elder who had instructed the four of them before they came over. This person was an expert at magic controlling realm. Seeing this head, the faces of Lan Yu and the others instantly turned snow white. The red-haired man grinned. Let me introduce myself. I'm from Qingzhou and my name is Yi Xian. I'm currently the Dean of Blue Waves Academy. Yi Xian. Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. What the fuck is this? P.S. I've been crazily stockpiling my manuscripts, and I'm striving for the 3rd chapter next week. Now I've been informed that I'll have to spend this year in the hospital. Because my condition is unstable, I'll have to stay in the hospital for observation. It's not that I don't want to write the third chapter, but I wanted to write the book until the end of the year. Unfortunately, things didn't go as I wished. This year, something happened to my family and it completely messed up my writing plan. I'm really sorry, my brothers. End of this chapter. Chapter 279. Yi Xian. Needless to say, Yi Xian was dumbfounded at this moment. If it was someone with the same name, then it wasn't impossible. However, this wasn't someone with the same name. Not only did the opposite party come from Qingzhou, he was also the dean of Blue Waves Academy. This was him impersonating him. Yi Xian's expression was incomparably gloomy and cold. He had already smelled a conspiracy. Hearing the words of the red-haired man, Lan Yu's complexion changed greatly. She looked at the red-haired man in horror. You are that Yi Xian wanted by Realm Protection Alliance. The red-haired man grinned. His mouth was full of red teeth. He slowly walked towards Lan Yu. What? Is there a problem? Lan Yu stared at the red-haired man. Yi Xian, my Blue Sword sect doesn't have any grudges with you. Why do you want to make my Blue Sword sect your enemy? The red-haired man smiled evilly. I don't like your Blue Sword sect. Is that okay? Impudent. Lan Yu said angrily. Yi Xian, you are too arrogant. The red-haired man waved his hand at Lan Yu and said with a smile, I, Yi Xian, am arrogant. If you don't accept it, come and hit me. Lan Yu was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said, Big sister, he said he is Yi Xian and you believe him. I also said I am his father, do you believe me? Lan Yu glared at Yi Xian. Just when she was about to speak, the red-haired man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian like a ghost. He looked at Yi Xian with a sinister smile. You seem very arrogant. Yi Xian tidied up his clothes. Then he sternly said, I am arrogant. If you don't accept it, come and hit me. The red-haired man grinned. I hope your ability is as tough as your mouth. After speaking, he was about to attack. But at this time Yi Xian suddenly said, Wait. The red-haired man stopped. Do you have any last words? Yi Xian said seriously, What if I really am your father? I say what if? Everything is possible. The man in red still had a smile on his face, but it was a very cold smile. You've successfully angered me, Right at this moment, a sword suddenly appeared in Yi Xian's hand. In the next moment he held the sword with both hands and slashed it down. Boom. As the sword slashed down, the red-robed man in front of Yi Xian suddenly exploded into a mist of blood. On the other hand, Yi Xian's expression was slightly solemn because the man in red had already appeared 30 meters away. However, at this moment, the man in red's expression was slightly unsightly. Obviously, even though that strike from before hadn't killed him, it had still affected him to a certain extent. The red-clothed man glared at Yi Xian. You're playing dirty. Yi Xian ignored the man in red. He turned to Bailey Yun and the other two. The three of you go back and report. Bailey Yun immediately shook his head. No, how can I leave you here alone? If you want to leave, then we'll leave together. Lan Yu suddenly said, Why are you still being pedantic at a time like this? It's more important to go back and report. As soon as she finished speaking, she shot into the sky on her sword. Right at this moment, the red-clothed man in front of Yi Xian suddenly raised his hand and waved it, causing an arrow of blood to tear through the sky. Lan Yu's expression changed drastically, and she immediately slashed down with her sword. However, the arrow of blood pierced through her sword and stabbed her chest. Bang! In an instant, Lan Yu's body exploded apart, but her soul was fine. At this moment, her soul was tightly enveloped by a ball of red light. A trace of surprise flashed through the red-clothed man's eyes. The Soul Guard mirror is a precious treasure, yet it was actually given to a piece of trash like you. What a waste. Lan Yu paid no attention to the red-clothed man, and she just gazed resentfully at Yi Xian. Why didn't you stop him? This chapter isn't finished. Please keep going. Yi Xian was stunned and then he said, Please, every debt has a debtor. It was he who destroyed your body, so why are you blaming me? Go look for him. Lan Yu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. I won't let you off. As soon as she finished speaking, she was escorted by the ray of red light, and she transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the boundless sky. Yi Xian shook his head. I actually encountered such a weirdo. I'm really unlucky this year. As he spoke, he gazed at Bailey Yun and Guyu. Quickly head back and leave this place to me. Both of you'll become burdens to me if you stay here. Bailey Yun and Guyu exchanged glances and then Bailey Yun spoke in a low voice. Brethren, hold on for a while. We'll immediately return to the sect and get someone to rescue you. As soon as he finished speaking, both of them shot into the sky on their swords. The red-clothed man waved his hand again, and then 2 blood-red arrows shot into the sky and chased after Bailey Yun and Guyu. However, these 2 blood-red swords had only just flown out when they were slashed into pieces by 2 rays of sword light. Bailey Yun and Guyu instantly heaved sighs of relief when they sensed this scene, and then they hurriedly sped up. It wasn't long before they vanished into the boundless sky. The red-clothed man gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. I never expected that I would be so blind. Yi Xian turned to face the red-clothed man. You're not Yi Xian, so why are you pretending to be Yi Xian? The corners of the red-clothed man's mouth curled up slightly. How do you know that I'm not Yi Xian? Yi Xian spoke seriously. Yi Xian has a dignified appearance, is handsome, elegant, talented and elegant. Such a person only appears once in 1,000 years. How could he possibly be a repulsive person like you? The red-clothed man was stunned. I've also seen Yi Xian's portrait. Honestly speaking, doesn't your conscience hurt by praising him like that? Yi Xian pointed his sword at the ground. I'm not going to bullshit with you. I'll ask you one last time, why did you pretend to be such an outstanding person and commit such evil deeds? The red-clothed man smiled. I'm not going to tell you. Yi Xian nodded. Then I'll beat you to death. As soon as he spoke, he stomped his right foot. Tenjiang kill. The red-clothed man's expression changed drastically as soon as the sword was unleashed. In the next moment, a cloud of blood mist suddenly condensed in front of him, and this cloud of blood mist forcefully blocked Yi Xian's fatal attack. However, this attack caused him to stumble backward. Not only that, but the cloud of blood mist also turned illusory at a speed visible to the naked eye. At that moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and another heaven-level sword appeared in his hand. In the next moment, the sword suddenly disappeared. Instant space. The instant the sword disappeared, the blood mist in front of the red-robed man exploded, and a sword was already pressed against the spot between his eyebrows. However, it was blocked by a thin layer of blood armor. Heaven-level armor. Even though it had been blocked, the powerful force contained in the sword had caused the blood armor to cave in deeply. At the same time, the area between the red-clothed man's eyebrows had caved in as well. The red-clothed man frantically retreated in order to reduce the force contained in Yi Xian's sword. However, that force was far too powerful, so powerful that he had no way of removing it. At that moment, the red-clothed man suddenly roared in anger. He stomped his right foot on the ground, causing the entire ground to shake violently. Using the strength of the ground, he forcefully stopped his retreat. However, the blood armor between his eyebrows had already cracked into a spider web. Just as he stopped, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him. Upon seeing Yi Xian, the red-clothed man hurriedly said, Brother, I am the young sect leader of the Corpse sect. This time, I am here on behalf of the Realm Protection Alliance to frame Yi Xian. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. The Realm Protection Alliance has entrusted me. At that moment, Yi Xian's sword had already struck out. One strike to determine life and death. This strike directly pierced through the red-clothed man's blood sword and his brain. The red-clothed man's body stiffened as he glared at Yi Xian with hatred. I told you everything but you still tried to kill me. Yi Xian shook his head. You're already an adult. Don't be so naive. If I don't kill you, should I leave you alive to harm me in the future? As he spoke, he swung his sword and the red-clothed man's head flew into the air. Just as the red-clothed man's head flew into the air, a blood-red mark suddenly flew into the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Yi Xian frowned. What's that? Very quickly Yi Xian understood. This should be a type of mark. It meant that he had killed the red-clothed man and the power behind the red-clothed man could use this mark to find him. Yi Xian thought for a moment before he activated the World Prison Pagoda. Very quickly, the blood-red mark was forced out of his brain by the World Prison Pagoda. Yi Xian waved his right hand and a ray of sword light enveloped the blood-red mark. Yi Xian kept the mark. Suddenly he seemed to have thought of something and chuckled. As he looked around, the 20 over corpses did not move at all. Obviously, after the red-clothed man's death, these corpses were now ownerless. Yi Xian hurriedly put away the storage ring of the man in red. He rummaged through it and very soon he was overjoyed. This was because he found a cultivation technique called the decaying scripture in the storage ring, and within it, there was a way to control these zombies. Big profit. Yi Xian chuckled. Each of these 22 corpses was at least at the Dharma realm. Moreover, Their bodies were special and could not be damaged by ordinary spiritual weapons. If he could control these 20 corpses and continue to train them until they reached the Dharma-controlling realm, they would become a great help to him. Sometimes, a fight depended on the number of people. In addition, this matter also served as a reminder to him. The Realm Protection Alliance had not forgotten him. The other party was still looking for him. Not only were they looking for him, but they were also looking for someone to impersonate him, ruin his reputation, and make him enemies everywhere. The Realm Protection Alliance. Yi Xian smiled coldly. The enmity between him and the Realm Protection Alliance could be said to be irreconcilable. But now there was still a big gap between his strength and the Realm Protection Alliances, so he could not use force for the time being. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian began to clean up the aftermath because the Pale Sword Sect's powerhouses might arrive soon. With a wave of his right hand, the red-clothed man's corpse was divided into more than a dozen pieces, and then he pieced them together into two large characters, Yi Xian. After doing all this, he quickly put away the surrounding corpses. Then he waited for the Pale Sword Sect's powerhouses to arrive. After almost a quarter of an hour, two sword lights suddenly appeared in the sky. Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. They're here. Soon, an old man and a middle-aged man appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian quickly saluted, "Greetings, elders." The middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian. "Are they all dead?" Yi Xian nodded. The old man asked, "Did you do it?" Yi Xian quickly shook his head. No, I didn't do it. It was Yi Xian." After saying that, he pointed to the two blood-red characters on the ground. Yi Xian. The middle-aged man and the old man looked at the ground. A moment later, the middle-aged man frowned. He looked at Yi Xian. "It really wasn't you." Yi Xian solemnly said, "I swear it was really that Yi Xian who did it. If I speak half a word of lies, I may be struck by lightning." End of this chapter. Chapter 280. After they heard Yi Xian, the old man and middle-aged man glanced at each other. In the end, the middle-aged man asked, "Why did Yi Xian appear here?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Elder, I don't know. However, according to my guess, it's very likely to be related to the red-clothed man pretending to be him." The middle-aged man intended to ask something else when the old man said abruptly, "This red-clothed man was able to kill a true defense realm expert, so his strength is obviously extraordinary. On the other hand, you allowed Bailey Yun and the others to leave first and successfully stopped the red-clothed man. Do you have anything to say about this?" Yi Xian laughed bitterly. "Elder, I don't think there's much of a problem if it's just stopping him for a moment, right?" The old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "Then why didn't you stop the red-clothed man when your senior sister Lan Yu left? Why did you allow him to slash her body into pieces instead?" Yi Xian's heart shook when he heard this. So that's the old man's true objective. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Elder, you have to be honest when you speak. Logically speaking, Lan Yu is the senior sister, so she should have stayed behind to protect the three of us. However, not only did she not stay behind after she encountered danger, she actually chose to flee." When he spoke up to hear, he faced the middle-aged man and said, "Elder, do you think senior sister Lan Yu's actions are justified?" The middle-aged man hadn't spoken when the old man spoke abruptly. "I didn't ask you anything else. I only asked you why you didn't stop the red-clothed man and allowed him to slash Lan Yu's body into pieces. Just answer this one point, understand?" His voice was slightly cold. Yi Xian faced the old man and said with a smile, "Elder, I'm very sad that senior sister Lan Yu's body was slashed into pieces as well. But the problem is, I wasn't the one who slashed her body into pieces, so why do you keep holding on to me?" As he spoke, he pointed at the red-clothed man's corpse on the ground. "Look for him, look for him." The old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "You clearly could have stopped him. Yet you didn't. What you're doing is equivalent to harming a fellow disciple, and for harming a fellow disciple, you should be punished by 10,000 swords." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned cold. First, she's stupid. Before coming to the island, I already warned her that this place is dangerous and that she needs to be careful. Unfortunately, she didn't listen. Second, when faced with danger as the senior sister, not only did she not choose to take on the responsibility of protecting her fellow disciple, she chose to be the first to escape. This is unjust. Third, she couldn't even withstand a single attack from the man in red. This is weak. I'm very curious what kind of master would raise such trash. Speaking up to this point, he pretended to be surprised. "Could it be you, elder?" "Impudent." The old man's expression instantly turned icy cold. At the same time he waved his right hand, and a wave of sword energy smashed down towards Yi Xian. The sword stance of a sword immortal. This force swept down like a storm, and the ground where Yi Xian stood was directly cracked by this force. On the other hand, Yi Xian even bent his waist in an instant. Not only did he bend his waist, but he even bent his legs. But it wasn't long before he forcefully stood up again. A trace of surprise flashed in the eyes of the middle-aged man by the old man's side when he witnessed this scene. On the other hand, there was a trace of surprise in the old man's eyes as well. In the next moment he raised his right hand and suddenly pressed it down, and the pressure from the force instantly rose explosively. Just at this moment Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Bang! Along with an explosion, the force directly collapsed, and Yi Xian himself was blasted over 100 meters away. As soon as he stopped, a wisp of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. In midair, the old man glanced coldly at Yi Xian. "I've underestimated you. You despised an elder and spoke rudely. Today I'll cripple you to serve as a warning to the entire sect." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly pointed with his finger, and a flying sword slashed down. The flying sword was extremely fast like a bolt of lightning. Below. This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. Xian's expression was rather ferocious, and profound qi surged within his body. He didn't dare hold back at all when facing a sword immortal, and a true Imperial Dharma realm expert at that. If he did, then only death would await him. Just as Yi Xian was about to attack, a beautiful figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Was Yu Qi. Yu Qi's face was expressionless. She pressed her jade-like fingers together and pointed forward lightly. With this point, a cloud-shaped sword qi suddenly shot out from the tip of her finger. Bang! In midair, the old man's sword was directly blasted away. The old man frowned slightly when he saw Yu Qi. "Junior sister Yu Yu." At this moment Yu Qi suddenly took a step forward and formed a sword seal. In the next moment, the clouds in the sky suddenly trembled, and in the blink of an eye, a sword came straight down from the clouds like a bolt of lightning. Seeing this scene, the old man's expression changed slightly. Sword in the cloud. Not daring to be careless, he opened his right hand and a sword quietly hung in the air. In the next moment, the sword turned into a sword light and soared into the sky. In midair, the two swords met. Bang! An ear-piercing sword cry suddenly resounded throughout the sky. Below, Yu Qi suddenly leaped, and the moment she leaped, several sword lights quietly gathered around her. Seeing this scene, the old man's eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a trace of fear in his eyes. Shadow sword. "Yu Qi, are you crazy, you?" He didn't dare to continue because Yu Qi had already arrived in front of him. Boom boom boom. In midair, the old man repeatedly struck with his sword, but he was also repeatedly retreating. The entire sky was filled with countless sword qi. Not far away, the middle-aged man hurriedly said, "Senior brother Tsang Xian, junior sister Yu Qi, please stop." However, Yu Qi did not stop. On the contrary, her attacks became even fiercer. On the other hand, Tsang Xian was clearly inferior to Yu Qi, and was already retreating step by step. Below, Yi Xian was a little dazzled by the sight. A battle between sword immortals. He had seen the mysterious woman in action before, but her attacks were basically instant kills. There was not much to see at all. But now, the battle between the two sword immortals made him realize just how cool the sword skills of sword immortals were. They were not flashy without substance. At the very least, the sword skills of the two people before him were very practical. Especially Yu Qi's, who skillfully executed all kinds of sword skills, making it difficult for Tsang Xian to parry. Just like that, after fighting for an unknown period of time, Tsang Xian suddenly turned into a sword light and disappeared into the horizon. He ran away. In the air, Yu Qi stopped. With a turn of her body, she directly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yu Qi glanced at Yi Xian. "Go back and cook." With that, she turned around and soared into the sky on her sword, disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Below, Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "I don't know how to use a sword." At this moment, the middle-aged man not far away suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian. Did Yi Xian say anything before he left? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, "He said that this matter is most likely the work of the Realm Defense Alliance." Realm Defense Alliance. The middle-aged man's brows deeply furrowed. Evidently, this faction was a headache even for the ancient sword sect. A moment later, the middle-aged man said softly, "This matter is a little complicated, you must not leak it." With that, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. On the spot, Yi Xian speechlessly asked the heavens, "I don't know how to use a sword." If the distance was short, he could naturally fly. This chapter is not over, please turn the page. It was the 10,000 Dharma stage, but if it was too far, flying in the air would tire him to death. But at this moment he had no other choice. Originally it would only take 4 hours to reach Azure Sword Sect, but he had spent more than 8 hours. As soon as he returned to Cloud's Word Peak, he was brought to Azure Sword Peak by Wuxia. Azure Sword Peak was the head of the 7 peaks, and could be considered the core of Azure Sword Sect. And the peak master of Azure Sword Peak was the sect master of Azure Sword Sect, Qin Beihan. When Yi Xian and Wuxia arrived at the Azure Sword Hall of the Azure Sword Peak, there were already a few people in the hall. Song Xian and the middle-aged man from before were present. Apart from them, Bailey Yun, Guyu and Lan Yu, who was already in soul form, were also present. When she saw Yi Xian, Lan Yu's gaze immediately turned venomous. Beside her, Song Xian also shot a cold glance at Yi Xian. Beside Yi Xian, Wuxia suddenly said, "Don't be afraid, her master can't beat me." Yi Xian. Bailey Yun smiled at Yi Xian as a form of greeting. Guyu nodded in agreement. Yi Xian was about to speak when a middle-aged man suddenly walked over from afar. The middle-aged man wore a cloud-white robe with a jade-white lion tied to his waist, and he held a flute in his right hand. Qin Beihan, the sect master of Azure Sword Sect. Yi Xian's expression instantly turned solemn when he saw this person, because he discovered that this person's aura was actually on par with Supreme Lord Lu. This person was also one of the top experts in the Azure world. Qin Beihan walked to the seats at the top of the stairs and smiled, "Everyone sit." Everyone in the surroundings bowed successively, and even Wuxia bowed slightly. Everyone sat down and Qin Beihan glanced at Yi Xian. "You're in Yi?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." Qin Beihan glanced at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "You are a good candidate." As he spoke, he glanced at the crowd. "I already know the whole story." As a senior sister, Lan Yu was obstinate and self-opinionated. She was narrow-minded and did not think twice when faced with trouble. She only ended up like this. Lan Yu's expression immediately turned ugly, but she did not dare to refute and hurriedly knelt down. Disciple knows her mistake. Qin Beihan looked towards Song Xian. Teaching disciples is not just about teaching them how to cultivate, but also how to conduct themselves. If young people do not know how to conduct themselves, they will suffer at the very least or lose their lives. Song Xian nodded. Junior brother understands and knows that Lan Yu was wrong. I have troubled senior brother to come out this time to ask senior brother to uphold justice. As he spoke, he looked towards Yi Xian. This person clearly had the ability to stop the man in red but did not. Instead, he deliberately did nothing to save him. Such a person does not deserve to be a disciple of my Azure Sword Sect. Qin Beihan looked towards Yi Xian. You had the ability to stop him but did not. What? Yi Xian pondered for a moment before he said, I don't like the sight of her. Everyone else? P.S. Today at the hospital, a man was arguing with a doctor. The reason was that when he was examined, he was not present, so the doctor let the next doctor take over. Then this man could not take it anymore and started scolding the female doctor in the hospital. He even said that she had accepted a red packet. The female doctor was so angry that she burst into tears. Many a time people like to bully the weak and fear the strong. If they met someone more ruthless than them, they would be as humble as a son. It was the new year, and they hoped that the brothers would be amiable. They should not bully others for no reason, but if others bullied them, they should not be afraid. It was not embarrassing if they could not win, but if they did not fight, it was very embarrassing. End of this chapter. Chapter 281. Everyone was taken aback by Yi Xian's words. You didn't like her? Bailey Yun smiled bitterly. Brother was an honest person. He didn't even know how to lie at a time like this. On the other hand, Lan Yu's expression was somewhat savage as she glared at Yi Xian. Wuxia also couldn't help glancing at Yi Xian. Be more tactful. Yi Xian. Song Xian suddenly said, Senior brother, you also saw how arrogant and domineering this person is. If such a person stays in the sect, he will definitely cause discord within the sect in the future, and outside the sect he will very likely cause a great disaster. Senior brother, please punish him severely. Qin Beihan smiled. Don't worry, junior brother, everything has a reason. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Tell me, why do you dislike her? Yi Xian shook his head. Even if I tell you, the sect master and some people may not believe me. Let senior brother Bailey and senior sister Guyu tell me. Qin Beihan looked at Bailey Yun and Wuxia. The two hurriedly bowed and recounted everything that had happened on the island. Gradually, Song Xian's expression turned rather ugly. He glared at Lan Yu. What a disappointment. Lan Yu lowered her head, not daring to speak. Yu Qi suddenly said, "The matter is very clear. He didn't deliberately cause trouble, and the troublemaker has already paid the price. My Cloud's Word Peak will not pursue the matter. Senior Brother Sect Master, I still have matters to attend to, so I will take my leave first." After speaking, she glanced at Yi Xian. "Go cook." Yi Xian chuckled, turned around and ran off. Yu Qi shook his head. "Slippery fellow." After speaking, she also turned to leave. At this moment, Qin Beihan suddenly said, "Junior sister, there are important matters to discuss." Outside the door, Yu Qi did not even turn his head. "You decide." Inside the hall, Qin Beihan shook his head with a bitter smile. This junior sister, as he spoke, he looked at Song Xian not far away. At the end of the day, the corpse sect is the culprit. As for the corpse sect, although they belong to the demonic path, they have always acted in the dark. This time they openly attacked our Pale Sword sect, so there must be someone behind them. Song Xian was about to say something when he seemed to have thought of something. He glanced at Bailey Yun and the others. Song Xian, Gu Yu and Lan Yu hurriedly left. After the trio left, Song Xian asked in a low voice, "Realm Defense Alliance?" Qin Beihan nodded. "There should be no mistake." Song Xian frowned. "Why are they against us too? To my Blue Sword sect has no enmity with them." Qin Beihan smiled and said, "Who said there's no enmity between us?" Song Xian shook his head. "If they wanted revenge, they wouldn't have waited until now." Qin Beihan nodded. "He definitely wouldn't have waited until now." At this point he exchanged a look with Song Xian before he continued, "There's something wrong with the island. Let's go check it out." With that, the two of them disappeared. Before long, the two of them arrived at Myriad Island. However, at this moment, the entire island had vanished. Seeing this scene, the two's expressions became a little grave. A short while later, Qin Beihan said, "Some powers in the Central Divine Prefecture have been secretly targeting the Realm Defense Alliance. Obviously, the Realm Defense Alliance has definitely done something to make those powers fear it. Especially Yi Xian and the powers standing behind him. His appearance on the island this time might be to disrupt the Realm Protection Alliance's plans. Pass down my order to find Yi Xian. We must get to the bottom of this matter." Song Xian nodded. "I understand. I'll send someone to search for Yi now, Xian." With that, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. In the air, Qin Beihan slowly closed his eyes. Realm Defense Alliance. I'm afraid that the changes in the Azure world have something to do with you guys. The Azure Sword Sect. After returning to Cloud Sword Peak, Yi Xian immediately began cooking. Half an hour later, he had already prepared a table full of dishes. The dishes looked and smelled delicious. Yu Qi came out when she smelled the aroma. She sat opposite Yi Xian and nodded. "Let's eat." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Master, please." Yu Qi didn't stand on ceremony and immediately started eating. After eating half, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Master, is the sword manipulation technique difficult?" Yu Qi said, "Difficult but not difficult." Yi Xian hurriedly put down his chopsticks. "What do you mean?" Yu Qi glanced at him. "It's not difficult to learn, but it's very difficult to learn it well." Yi Xian asked again, "How can I be considered to have learned it well?" Yu Qi took a small sip of vegetable soup and then said, "You can fight while controlling the sword." Yi Xian was taken aback. "Then Bailey Yun and the others can't fight while controlling the sword?" Yu Qi shook her head. "No." Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "Master, I want to learn this sword manipulation technique." Yu Qi's chopsticks suddenly stopped. She looked at Yi Xian with some surprise. "You don't know how to control the sword?" Yi Xian nodded. "I don't know." Yu Qi shook her head. "A sword master who doesn't know how to control the sword, what does it look like?" Speaking of this, she seemed to have thought of something. "Later, come to my inner hall to look for a cultivation technique called True Sword Manipulation Technique. This cultivation technique is personally created by me. It's not something that ordinary sword manipulation techniques can compare to. Remember, don't teach it to others. True Sword Manipulation Technique." Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. Yes. Yu Qi nodded slightly. She pointed to the mushroom stir-fried cabbage in front of her. "Not bad. Continue to make this dish tomorrow." Yi Xian. After the meal, Yu Qi left the hall. No one knew where she went. As for Yi Xian, after tidying up, he hurriedly entered the inner hall. The inner hall wasn't big. It was filled with cabinets. On each cabinet there were many scrolls. Among them were cultivation techniques, martial techniques, and divine arts. All of them. Moreover, the lowest was earth rank. There were even heaven rank scrolls everywhere. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. At this moment he realized that this cloudy sword peak was actually the F*King Azure Sword Sect's martial technique library and cultivation technique library. The scrolls in front of him were probably collected by the Azure Sword Sect over the generations. Some of them were created by the seniors of the Azure Sword Sect. Foundation. At this moment Yi Xian truly understood what a foundation was. This was a foundation. This Azure Sword Sect was indeed a top force in the Azure Firmament world. Without much thought, Yi Xian began to search for the true sword manipulation technique. Soon he found it. Then he began to search for Yu Qi's annotations. However, no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find it. After an hour he still couldn't find it. Therefore he stopped searching. He was going to ask Yu Qi when he returned. Or rather, he was going to ask Yu Qi directly. Yi Xian carried the true sword manipulation technique out of the hall and went straight to the back mountain. After Yi Xian had left the hall, a woman and a middle-aged man showed up at the entrance of the hall. These two people were Yu Qi and Qin Beihan. The two people looked at Yi Xian, who was running in the distance. Qin Beihan suddenly said, "During this time he only chose instant space sword?" Yu Qi nodded. Qin Beihan asked again, "He didn't take away any of the cultivation techniques and martial techniques in the hall?" Yu Qi nodded again. Qin Beihan smiled and said, "That's interesting. If it was a rogue cultivator, it would be impossible for him not to be tempted by these things." At this point he looked at Yu Qi. Did he really cultivate that instant space sword to the extreme in just a few days? Yu Qi said softly, "Everyone has their own secrets. It's enough that he doesn't have any bad intentions towards our sect." Qin Beihan said with a smile, "Although he didn't save Lan Yu on Myriad Island, he saved Bailey Yun and those two little fellows. This proves that he isn't a heartless person. Since Junior Sister thinks he's not bad, then let him stay here and cultivate. He's indeed a good seedling. If you nurture him well, he will definitely achieve great things in the future." After saying that, he turned and disappeared on the spot. After Qin Beihan left, Yu Qi also turned and left. When she returned to the inner hall, there was a small table in the inner hall. On the small table there were 3 plates of small fruits. Seeing this small table, Yu Qi said softly, "How thoughtful." Back mountain. Yi Xian held the sword driving technique in his arms as he dashed madly all the way until he stopped before a pool of water. After he stopped, Yi Xian opened the sword driving technique. Sword driving technique relies on the heart and not the form. The heart and soul are united and man and sword are one. Just like that, Yi Xian read and read for an hour before he stopped, and then he sat cross-legged on the ground and started to analyze it in his mind. Around 2 hours later, he suddenly formed a sword seal, and it wasn't long before a true rank sword suddenly flew out from within him and descended firmly in front of him. Yi Xian pressed his fingers against the sword, and it trembled violently before it emanated a resounding sword howl. Yi Xian was overjoyed when he saw this, and he hurriedly leaped up and descended onto the sword. However, the sword had almost sunk into the ground. Yi Xian hurriedly calmed himself, and the sword gradually started to stabilize. Once it was stable enough, Yi Xian suddenly started to speak softly, "Rise." As soon as he spoke, the sword beneath his feet started to rise slowly. It was slightly slow, but it was constantly rising. 3m, 6m, 15m, 30m. In just a moment he was over 100m above the ground, and he was able to see Cloudsword Hall in the distance. He was excited. Being able to control a sword was undoubtedly the dream of every swordsman. In the sky, Yi Xian's sword control grew higher and higher. However, he was too excited to notice that the sword beneath his feet was trembling. Just like that, after rising over 500m, the sword beneath Yi Xian's feet suddenly trembled violently, and then it fell swiftly to the ground. Yi Xian's scream instantly resounded from the sky. A few breaths of time later. Bang! The ground beneath him trembled violently, and a huge amount of dust flew into the air. On the ground, Yi Xian rubbed his butt. "That really fucking hurts." After resting for a moment, Yi Xian continued. Time passed slowly, and at dawn the next day, a man arrived at the foot of Pale Sword Sect's mountain. The man wore a plain robe and a pair of cloth shoes, and his eyes were dark violet. The man raised his head and glanced at Pale Sword Sect. According to rumor, Pale Sword Sect's younger generation is an outstanding genius. "I'm Yi Xian and I've come to seek guidance." When he spoke up to hear, he paused slightly and continued. to determine who's stronger and who lives and dies. Chapter 282. Yixian. The entire Blue Sword sect was shocked. This second on the wanted list actually came to challenge Blue Sword sect? Soon, an elder of Blue Sword sect appeared in front of the linen-clothed man. This elder sized up the linen-clothed man. "You are Yixian?" The linen-clothed man nodded. "Azure Province, Yixian." The elder looked at Yixian for a long time before shaking his head. "You don't look like Yixian, and it's impossible for you to be Yixian." The linen-clothed man was expressionless. "I am." The elder said, "Yixian and the Realm Protecting Alliance have a great enmity. Under normal circumstances, he definitely wouldn't make an enemy out of my Blue Sword sect. Yixian isn't that stupid." The linen-clothed man smiled. "Why? Blue Sword sect doesn't dare to accept my challenge? Or is there no one in the younger generation of Blue Sword sect?" The elder looked at the linen-clothed man, his eyes gradually turning cold. Someone was trying to cause trouble for the Blue Sword sect. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out from the top of the mountain. "If he wants to challenge, then let him challenge. My Blue Sword sect, be it in the past or now, has never been afraid of trouble. Disciples of the Seven Peaks, who is willing to come out and fight with me? Let me." At this time, a loud shout suddenly rang out from one of the main peaks. Following that, a sword light shot into the sky. But after it reached the sky, this sword light suddenly changed direction and steadily landed in front of the linen-clothed man. The sword light dissipated, revealing a man around 20 years of age. His skin was dark, his eyes sharp, and he held a sheathed sword in his hand. "It's Array Dao Peak's senior brother Chen Yun." In the surroundings, people exclaimed. Chen Yun bowed to the elder beside him, then turned to look at the linen-clothed man. "Make your move." The linen-clothed man said indifferently, "If I make my move, you won't have a chance to do so." Chen Yun wasn't angry. "It seems like you are very confident in yourself. Then let me experience your strength." As the sound of his voice faded, his left thumb suddenly flickered. The sword in the scabbard flew out at an incomparably fast speed. The linen-clothed man was expressionless. When the sword arrived in front of him, he didn't dodge, but when the sword was only an inch away from him, he suddenly moved to the side and dodged the sword by a hair's breadth. At the same time, his right hand grabbed Chen Yun's sword. At the sight of this, the Pale Sword sect's elder's expression instantly changed. Chen Yun's eye, who was about to attack, was also stunned. The man glanced at Chen Yun, and in the next moment, his right foot lightly tapped the ground. The linen-clothed man appeared in front of Chen Yun like a ghost, causing Chen Yun's expression to change drastically. He was just about to attack when the linen-clothed man's speed was faster than him, and he directly grabbed Chen Yun by the throat. At the same time, the linen-clothed man's right foot kicked Chen Yun's knees twice. With the sound of two bones breaking, Chen Yun knelt down. The surroundings were deathly silent. Utter defeat. The linen-clothed man didn't kill Chen Yun, and he retreated a few meters instead. He glanced indifferently at Chen Yun, who knelt there. Is the younger generation of the Pale Sword sect filled with trash like this? When he spoke up to hear, he raised his head to look at the other peaks. If so, then all of you can attack me together. Don't waste my Yixian's time. Attack together. As soon as these words were spoken, it had undoubtedly infuriated all the disciples of the Pale Sword sect. In next to no time, numerous rays of light shot into the sky from the various peaks, and it wasn't long before a few dozen swordsmen stood before the linen-clothed man. The linen-clothed man had an emotionless expression on his face. "Let's do it together." Meanwhile, a man walked out from the group of swordsmen. "I'll do it." Everyone gazed at the man. The man wore a short shirt and had two swords hanging from his waist. "It's the Shenzhen Peak's senior brother Gu Lin. I never expected that he would actually come out as well. What's there to not expect? This Yixian humiliated our Pale Sword sect so much, how could senior brother Gu Lin and the others not come out? I wonder if senior brother Nangong Yen of the Pale Sword Peak is in the sect. There's no need for senior brother Nangong Yen, senior brother Gu Lin is enough." Gu Lin walked in front of Chen Yun and helped him up. Behind him, the disciples of the Pale Sword sect immediately ran over to support Chen Yun. Chen Yun wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. "Be careful. He's very strong." Gu Lin nodded. He looked at the linen-clothed man. "Rumor has it that Yixian is also a swordsman and also a sword emperor, the youngest sword emperor in our Azure world. However, you don't use a sword." The linen-clothed man said indifferently, None of you are qualified to make me Yi Xian draw my sword. The moment these words were spoken, the disciples of the Pale Sword sect were instantly enraged. Gu Lin glanced at the linen-clothed man. Please enlighten me. As the sound of his voice faded, he suddenly dashed forward. This dash was as fast as lightning, and a ray of sword light instantly appeared in front of the linen-clothed man. The linen-clothed man's expression was incomparably calm. When the sword was only half an inch away from his forehead, his body suddenly slanted backwards, very easily dodging the sword. At the same time, his right leg suddenly kicked out at Gu Lin's wrist. Gu Lin's entire arm was directly sent flying, but at this moment, Gu Lin's left hand suddenly pulled out a sword and slashed forward. The linen-clothed man blocked with his fingers, and this finger actually forcefully blocked Gu Lin's sword. At the same time, he dashed forward and suddenly kicked Gu Lin's abdomen with his knee. Gu Lin's entire body instantly flew tens of feet away. After landing, Gu Lin's body twitched and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Another complete defeat. The scene was incomparably silent. The linen-clothed man clapped his hands and looked at the elder beside him. Is there no one else in the Pale Sword sect? Or is it that the Pale Sword sect is full of such trash? The elder took a deep look at the linen-clothed man, and only now did he realize that his eyes were blind. This linen-clothed man in front of him was not simple. The elder turned to look at the Pale Sword peak, and after a moment he nodded slightly, and then turned to look at the linen-clothed man. Can you wait for an hour? The linen-clothed man said indifferently, sure. The elder turned to look at the Pale Sword sect disciples. Without my order, no one is allowed to make a move. With that, he soared into the sky on his sword. The linen-clothed man slowly closed his eyes to rest. There were only 3 people in the Azure Sword Hall, Song Xian, Qin Beihan, and a Pale Sword sect elder named Li Han, who was in charge of the Pale Sword sect's intelligence. Song Xian looked at Li Han. Did you find out that person's true identity? Li Han shook his head. Not a single clue. Song Xian's face sank and he asked again, what about Yi Xian's whereabouts? Li Han still shook his head. After this person left Cold North sect, there was no news of him, as though he had vanished into thin air. Other than that, I received news that the Realm Protection Alliance, Sky Cloud City and several other powerhouses are looking for this person's whereabouts. Song Xian frowned. Even the Realm Protection Alliance has not been able to find him? Li Han nodded. This person is very mysterious and he himself is not simple. Song Xian went silent for a moment, and then looked at Qin Beihan. Qin Beihan shook his head. My Pale Sword sect has been quiet for so many years. Some people really think that we are a soft persimmon and can be easily bullied. Speaking of this, he looked at Li Han. How long will that kid Nangong take to return to the sect? Li Han said in a deep voice. 1 hour, at most 1 hour. Qin Beihan nodded slightly, and as though he thought of something he said again, inform Shang Yu, ask him to return to the sect immediately. Shang Yu. In the hall, Song Xian and Li Han were instantly stunned. Cloudy Sword Peak. At noon, Yi Xian did not continue to practice the imperial sword technique, but made a table full of dishes. Inside the hall, Yi Xian and Yu Qi sat facing each other. Yu Qi was a man of few words, but Yi Xian was very talkative. During the meal, he would try to find all kinds of topics to talk about, and Yu Qi would sometimes reply with a few words, and other times he would just say, "N." When they were about to finish eating, Yu Qi suddenly said, You seem to have told me before that your name is Yi Xian? Yi Xian was stunned for a moment, then nodded, yes. Yu Qi glanced at Yi Xian. A person came down from the mountain claiming to be Yi Xian, saying that he wants to challenge all the younger generation of our Pale Sword sect. Yi Xian. Yi Xian was instantly stunned. Very quickly Yi Xian's face turned cold. Someone was impersonating him again. Realm Protection Alliance. Even if you used your toes to think, you would know that this was definitely done by the Realm Protection Alliance. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly put down his chopsticks. Master Yu, I'll go and see who is so arrogant to dare to challenge our Pale Sword sect. With that, he got up and walked out of the hall. Just as Yi Xian walked out of the hall, Yu Qi's voice came from inside the hall. Don't attack, that person is very strong. Yi Xian did not answer but ran down the mountain of Pale Sword sect. Inside the hall, Yu Qi said softly, Yi Xian? Is he very famous? As she spoke, she continued to eat. Not long after, Yi Xian arrived at the foot of the mountain. At this moment, there were already nearly 200 people gathered there, all of them were Pale Sword sect disciples. Moreover, Yi Xian noticed the man in linen clothes not too far away. Yi Xian was instantly infuriated when he saw the man in linen, so he charged at the man in linen at an extremely fast speed like a ray of light. In an instant, he arrived in front of the man in linen, and then, under the gazes of countless people, he slashed with his sword. A single strike to decide life and death. The strength contained within this strike was like an erupting volcano, and a powerful force instantly swept out. The man in linen clothes instantly opened his eyes when he sensed this energy, and there was a trace of solemnity in his eyes. In the next moment he moved his right foot lightly to the right and formed a seal with both hands before he suddenly pushed it forward. A strange ripple surged out from his hand seal. Bang! As soon as the two forces collided, they suddenly erupted, and then both of them were pushed back repeatedly by over 100 m. Moreover, the ground before them had been transformed into an enormous pit. It was caused by the two forces from before. Everyone here was stunned when they witnessed this scene, and then countless gazed at Yi Xian. Who's this fellow? Yi Xian had just joined the Pale Sword sect, and coupled with the fact that he was often at Cloudsword Peak and practically never left, practically no disciple of the Pale Sword sect besides Bailey Yun and Guyu recognized him. The man who stood before Yi Xian glanced at Yi Xian. Who are you? I'm your father. Yi Xian suddenly spoke furiously. What kind of trash is this? How dare you pretend to be me? How dare you cause trouble in my Pale Sword sect? I'll fucking kill you. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged at the man with his sword in hand. A disciple of the Pale Sword sect was slightly dumbstruck. This senior brother is so violent. P.S. There are 3 more days until the new year. I've been writing for 4 years without realizing it, and I'm 18 years old this year. Time waits for no man. I hope everyone is well. Chapter 283. At this moment, everyone was staring curiously at Yi Xian. In the distance, when Yi Xian rushed to the man in linen clothes with his sword in hand, he swung his sword down. The man in linen clothes narrowed his eyes and raised his fingers to block Yi Xian's sword. Surprisingly, he managed to block Yi Xian's sword. At the same time, his other hand had already smashed towards Yi Xian's head. Yi Xian had never been afraid of close combat. He immediately tilted his head and dodged the punch. At the same time he kicked towards the man's abdomen, and the man also kicked out. Bang! With a muffled sound, both of them retreated rapidly. This time they retreated more than 100 meters. But this time both of them were equally matched. The man glanced at Yi Xian. I never thought that besides Shang Yu, there would be another monster in the Pale Sword sect. He's really hidden well. However, Yi Xian? Yi Xian? Yi Xian suddenly laughed. You say you're Yi Xian? The man said indifferently. Is there a problem? Yi Xian smiled. Everyone knows Yi Xian is the Sword Emperor. Speaking up to here, he pointed at the man. Come, let us see if you're the Sword Emperor. If you are, then you're Yi Xian. If not, then you're an imposter to frame me. The man stared at Yi Xian with an expressionless face. You're not qualified for me to draw my sword. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward. With this step, the ground in front of Yi Xian suddenly cracked, and then a fist mark flashed out. Yi Xian smiled coldly, dashed forward, and slashed down with his sword. Bang! The fist seal shattered with a loud rumble. After shattering the fist mark, Yi Xian grinned. You're too weak. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in his hand suddenly shot out like a bolt of lightning. The man in linen clothes who stood before Yi Xian took a step forward and pointed his finger forward. The space before him instantly trembled before it rippled like water, and this spatial ripple actually forcefully shattered Yi Xian's sword light and forced Yi Xian's sword to stop moving. The spell defensive state. A wave of exclamations resounded in the surroundings. To be able to use the power of space to this extent, one had to be at least in the Dharma defensive realm. Moreover, he might even be very close to the true defensive Dharma state. In the air, Yi Xian's sword stopped as if it had been frozen by an invisible force. At this moment, Yi Xian made a grabbing motion towards his sword with his right hand. This grabbing motion, gotcha. Something seemed to have shattered, and then the sword that was frozen in midair suddenly shot towards the linen-clothed man. The linen-robed man's expression changed slightly when he saw this, and he brought his hands together in front of him. Boom. With this, he directly held Yi Xian's sword in his palm. However, at this moment, a sword silently appeared behind his head. Instant space slash. At this moment, the man in linen clothes was shocked. He stomped his right foot on the ground and disappeared from where he was. When he reappeared, he was already more than 100 feet behind Yi Xian. However, there was a deep sword wound at the back of his head, and blood was flowing out from it. That strike just now had almost taken his life. The linen-clothed man glared at Yi Xian. "Who exactly are you?" Yi Xian said seriously. "Since you keep asking, then I won't hide it anymore. Actually, I might be your long-lost father." The others in the surroundings were instantly stunned when they heard this, and then countless roars of laughter resounded like thunder in the surroundings. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the linen-clothed man's expression instantly turned cold. "You're a monster, yet you don't know how to respect the strong?" "Respect?" Yi Xian laughed coldly. "Why should I respect a lowly person like you who's pretending to be someone else?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly tapped his right foot against the ground, and his figure instantly arrived above the linen-clothed man. At the same time, he held his sword with both hands and swung it down. In Yi Xian's opinion, he didn't dare to expose too much. Regardless of whether it was the sword of earth, his sword intent, or even his sword aura, he didn't dare to expose any of them. Once he did, then it was very likely that his identity would be exposed. A ferocious expression appeared on the linen-clothed man's face when he saw Chen Shi's attack. He suddenly pressed his fingers together and pressed them against his chest. In an instant, a powerful aura swept out from within him, and then he swiftly swung his fist upwards. Bang! The linen-clothed man was instantly blasted over 30 m away. As soon as he stopped moving, Yi Xian appeared in front of him again, and then Yi Xian swung his sword again. Yi Xian's attack was extremely simple, and it couldn't even be considered as a sword technique. However, it was extremely violent and effective. The linen-clothed man's expression changed drastically when he noticed the strength within Yi Xian's attack. He suddenly flashed 30 m back and avoided Yi Xian's attack. At the same time, he suddenly smashed his fist forward. Yi Xian was about to continue attacking when a powerful force suddenly surged out from the space in front of him. Yi Xian hurriedly raised his sword to block it. Bang! A muffled bang resounded as Yi Xian was blasted back repeatedly. But it wasn't long before he stomped his right foot on the ground and instantly stopped moving. Yi Xian shook his slightly numb hand, and then he looked up at the linen-clothed man. Not only was the man before him at the law control realm, he was definitely at the law control realm when he was at the law realm. If he didn't expose his trump cards, then even though he could kill the man with his current strength, it would probably be a fierce battle. The linen-clothed man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. At this moment, there was a solemn expression in his eyes. After a moment of silence, the linen-clothed man suddenly opened his right hand, and a dark wheel of blades suddenly appeared at the center of his palm. As soon as this wheel of blades appeared, the expressions of all the disciples of the sword sect instantly changed. Because this wheel of blades was a heaven-ranked treasure. A heaven-ranked treasure. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. The linen-clothed man held the wheel of blades in his right hand while he suddenly formed a seal with his left hand. In the next moment, his entire body instantly became illusory. Subsequently, sharp sounds of slicing resounded all around Yi Xian. At the same time, numerous afterimages suddenly appeared around Yi Xian, and all of these afterimages held the wheel of blades in their hands and slashed at Yi Xian. Every single one of them seemed to be fake, yet they seemed to be real at the same time. It was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. An illusion. If it was someone else, then it would definitely be useful. However, Yi Xian didn't have eyes. He'd always been looking at the world with his heart. Under the gazes of everyone present, Yi Xian suddenly stabbed towards the right, and a strand of light flashed on the tip of his sword. Clang! The countless afterimages instantly dispersed, and only Yi Xian and the linen-clothed man remained. At this moment, the wheel of blades that the linen-clothed man slashed at Yi Xian had just been blocked by Yi Xian's sword. However, numerous cracks had appeared on Yi Xian's sword. Obviously, the true rank couldn't compare to the heaven rank. Suddenly, Yi Xian twisted his right hand. Bang! The linen-clothed man retreated by over 30 m, but numerous more cracks had appeared on the sword in Yi Xian's hand. Yi Xian's expression sank when he sensed the changes in his sword. His expression sank. Under the circumstances that he couldn't expose his strength, he was utterly unable to protect this sword. Because this sword was unable to go against a heaven-rank spirit artifact without the boost of his sword intent. On the other hand, he couldn't withdraw his heaven-rank sword. Because it would be too conspicuous if he did that. When they saw Yi Xian's sword, the expressions of all the disciples of the Blue Sword sect had turned gloomy. The current situation was slightly disadvantageous to Yi Xian. Right at this moment, the linen-clothed man suddenly tossed the wheel of blades in his hand, and it flew towards the top of Yi Xian's head. In next to no time, countless blades shot out violently from within the wheel of blades and slashed directly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian flashed backwards, and he pressed his sword against the center of his forehead. Under the gazes of countless people, Yi Xian suddenly let go of the sword in his hand. The sword flew out. A resounding sword howl suddenly resounded through the sky. After that, countless illusory swords suddenly appeared in the sky above Yi Xian, and they completely blocked the wheel of blades. The disciples of the Blue Sword sect in the surroundings were stunned when they witnessed this scene. What sort of sword technique is that? Meanwhile, someone exclaimed with shock. Void Flash. That's Void Flash. It's Void Flash that's cultivated to its limits. When Void Flash was cultivated to its limits, then it actually didn't consist of a single sword but countless swords. Because Void Flash represented speed, and speed meant that numerous swords could be formed. It wasn't possible to cultivate an ordinary sword technique to its limits, but it was extremely difficult to cultivate a heaven-rank sword technique to its limits. On the other hand, if Yi Xian didn't possess the spatial Dao laws, then it would be impossible for him to cultivate swordsman Void Flash to such an extent. At the very least, it would be impossible in a short period of time. The linen-clothed man who stood before Yi Xian had an extremely unsightly expression on his face. He hadn't imagined that his killer move would actually be destroyed by Yi Xian just like that. The linen-clothed man was just about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. In the next moment, Yi Xian had appeared in front of the linen-clothed man. The linen-clothed man had a ferocious expression on his face as he swiftly swung the wheel of blades in his hand. On the other hand, Yi Xian's sword stabbed towards the linen-clothed man's throat. He didn't block it. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. Is Yi Xian intending to exchange his life for another's? The linen-clothed man was quite astounded as well. Obviously, he hadn't expected that Yi Xian would be so resolute and actually not choose to block it. What should I do now? In practically an instant, the linen-clothed man had decided. He would exchange his life for another's. Because if he were to make a move now, then he would instantly be in a disadvantageous position and might even be killed. At a moment like this, it was a competition of courage and courage. The one who was afraid of death might be the one to die first. At this moment, time seemed to have frozen here. Everyone stared at the sword and wheel of blades in the distance. Both of them had descended onto Yi Xian and the linen-clothed man at practically the exact same moment. Bang! A silhouette flew out in an instant, and this time he flew a full 1,000 feet away. This figure was exactly Yi Xian, and the linen-clothed man stood on the spot. After a short moment, Yi Xian stood up slowly while blood flowed incessantly from the corner of his mouth. It was like a breached dam. However, he wasn't dead. He forcefully withstood it. In the distance, there was a sword stuck in the man's throat. The man in linen clothes stared at Yi Xian. Why? Why? Yi Xian patted his chest. Soon, a thin armor covered his entire body including his head. Yi Xian smirked. I have a heavenly armor. Are you angry? Are you angry? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.